Chapter 135. Without hesitation, Nia Yaonu grabbed Wu Qi and dragged him into the cave abode of sword stems from the mind. Nia Baihong unleashed a few sword beams, hacking and slashing around the main peak for a while. When he found no one was hiding in the vicinity, he hastily plunged into the cave abode. Both mother and son grabbed Wu Qi and sprinted all the way into the Peerless Sword Formation Pavilion. Nia Yaonu forcefully pressed Wu Qi onto a hassock, then glared at Wu Qi with bloodshot eyes and shouted, "What did you say? The sword technique of mountain crumbling and sky burning? How did you know about these two sword techniques? Where did you get them?" On the other side, Nia Baihong directly shot out wisps of sharp energy from his eyes, pressing down on Wu Qi as he said, "These two sword techniques are the two missing parts of heaven-breaking sword sect's 5 elemental sword techniques. Without them, the highest sword intent of heaven-breaking sword sect, the unity of sword energy script, would never be able to attain the mastery level. Although Mother has managed to complete the unity of sword energy script by reversing the cultivation technique of wood, metal, and water sword techniques, it is, after all, not an orthodox technique. Therefore, its power is only about 40% of the true unity of sword energies." Grabbing Wu Qi's shoulder with both hands, Nia Baihong said with a deep voice, "Tell me quickly, where did you learn about the sword technique of mountain crumbling and sky burning? And where did you get them? These two sword techniques are extremely important to our sect. You can't make fun of them." Looking at the extremely nervous Nia Yaonu and Nia Baihong, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, "Didn't Elder Yen tell you about this? I thought he should have told you both long ago. Yesterday, when I was in the Mo forest, I witnessed old Mr. Mod using a clump of purple flame to calcine 3 barbarian stone tablets of inheritance, and from them, I managed to find 4 cultivation techniques. I quickly memorized them." Nia Yaonu and Nia Baihong's expressions froze, and they couldn't help but exchange a glance. Wu Qi did not keep them in suspense. Instead, he told Nia Yaonu and her son about how he was summoned by Jing Ke to Mo Forest yesterday, met with Mod, and secretly memorized 2 sword techniques. When he was done, he smiled at the two of them and said, "Logically speaking, the great general should have sent someone to inform Elder Yen early in the morning after obtaining these 2 sword techniques." Nia Yaonu snorted coldly, staring at the ceiling and didn't say anything for a long while. On the other side, Nia Baihong sneered and said, if he obtained these 2 sword techniques, he would only let his disciples cultivate them. Why would he give them to us? These 2 sword techniques were not of much use to him. They could not increase his magic power or divine abilities at all. But in the hands of Mother and I, we can truly complete the origin of sword chi formula. Mother originally needed 10 years to truly become a nascent soul, but now it may only take a few months. Wu Qi blinked his eyes and said with a smile, "All right, disciple will write down the sword technique and hand it over to Master and Grand Elder. But, this is what disciple wants." Nia Yaonu said resolutely, "Except for the origin of sword chi formula, which I can't teach you yet, I can give you the other 3 sword techniques now. You want a crafting room? I happen to have a pretty good crafting room here, and the flame in it is the magma flame from the Earth's core. No matter what you want to craft, this flame will be more than enough." Wu Qi clapped his hands, laughed and said, "Excellent. Grand Elder is indeed generous." Without hesitation, Nia Yaonu took out 3 small booklets, in which were the cultivation techniques of the Azure Water Sword Technique, Green Thunder Sword Technique, and Thunder Lightning Sword Technique. Wu Qi did not waste any time. Nia Yaonu personally carried a writing table to him, while Nia Baihong stood beside her, helping him grind the ink and brush. Wu Qi began to write down the sword techniques of the mountain crumbling sword technique and the sky burning sword technique which he had memorized. Then, he wrote down all 36 energy circulation diagrams, and all the incantations of the cultivation techniques without missing a single word. Whenever Wu Qi finished drawing an energy circulation diagram, Nia Yaonu would quickly snatch it over and give it a careful look. The smile on her face grew brighter and brighter. On the other side, Nia Baihong was nervously telling Wu Qi, "Don't make any mistake, don't make any mistake. If a single meridian goes wrong, my mother will face the risk of suffering from energy deviation. Nya Baihang kept talking and nagging. Normally, he was cold, merciless, and decisive, but today, he was no different than a long-tongued old granny. In the end, even Nya Yaonu could not stand him any longer. She grabbed Nya Baihang and threw him far away. Shut up. How could an old granny have such an impatient child like you? Get the hell out of here. Search carefully in the sect, and see if that old fool Yan Li has obtained the two-sword techniques. After pondering for a brief moment, Nya Yaonu said coldly, Yan Li has taken in a few new disciples before the new year, and all of them have spirit seed constitutions of earth and fire element. It looks like he has been prepared for this. Find an opportunity and let these few disciples die in an accident. As for the clans behind these few disciples, it's up to you. Wu Qi raised his head and gave Nya Yaonu a look, whose face was filled with a murderous aura, and nodded his head silently. The internal strife of heaven-breaking sword sect had come to this. At the critical moment, Nya Yaonu was much more useful than Nya Baihang. Presumably, these disciples taken in by Yan Li were the geniuses who were the most suitable to cultivate the mountain-crumbling and sky-burning sword techniques. If Nya Baihang really assassinated these few disciples, Yan Li would have a big headache. After spending half an hour, Wu Qi finally handed over the two complete sword techniques to Nya Yaonu. After reading them carefully, Nya Yaonu breathed out a sigh and said, Finally, I've completed the sword techniques of 5 elements. Now, the other sword techniques derived from them will not be a problem anymore. The Unity of Sword Energy's script of heaven-breaking sword sect is finally complete. However, it is a little strange. Why would the sword techniques of heaven-breaking sword sect appear in the territory of barbarians? And why did the ancestors of barbarians fuse them into the stone tablets of inheritance? And why would the scouting office send someone to search the barbarian territory? Wu Qi was surprised by Nya Yaonu's question as well. He pondered for a while, then vaguely gave her a possible answer. Before Great Yan Dynasty was founded, this place was the territory of the Barbarian Alliance. With the strength of barbarians at that time, it shouldn't be a difficult task for them to break into some immortal's cave and take away some legacy techniques. However, no one knew why the barbarians only took away 2 sword techniques. Nya Yaonu added some explanations to Wu Qi's answer. When she found this immortal's cave, 3 sword techniques were placed in 3 different places, and the places where the mountain-crumbling and sky-burning sword techniques were supposed to be placed were empty. Presumably, it was because of what Wu Qi said, that these 2 sword techniques were taken away by the barbarians. Both of them exchanged a glance, and both felt that this was the only explanation. Since Great Yan Dynasty had wiped out the Barbarian Alliance in the war in those years, they must have some knowledge about the situation of the barbarians. Therefore, they must have some clues about which tribe took away some cultivation techniques. After over 2,000 years of relentless investigation, it was reasonable for them to have some results. However, the fact that the cultivation techniques of Yan Dan, Jing Ku, and the others were not complete in the hands of the barbarians had shocked Nya Yaonu. Despite cultivating with incomplete cultivation techniques, they were still able to wipe out the Barbarian Alliance. Was it because the barbarians were too weak, or was it because Yan Dan, Jing Ku, and the others were too strong? Shaking their heads, both of them decided not to pursue this question further. Nya Yaonu solemnly kept the sword techniques into her storage ring, then brought Wu Qi to the crafting room where he saw her crafting flying swords when he stole the dustless lamp last time. On the floor of the empty crafting room, a large suppressing formation was constructed using various fire-resistant materials. Nearly 1,000 upper-tier earth elemental energy stones, each the size of a human head, were embedded in the formation, firmly suppressing the raging lava flame that was about to burst out from underground. A 30 feet tall, 3-legged bronze cauldron was seen hovering in the middle of the formation. All 3 legs of the cauldron were emitting a pale green glow, and a threatening cold breeze was vaguely spreading out from them. At the center of the formation, there was a roughly 1 foot wide fire hole, weaving into a very large light barrier. Nia Yaonu brought Wu Qi to this place, then looked at him suspiciously and said, with your current cultivation base, the water elemental cultivation technique you cultivated should have become useless. Although you have cultivated the qi circulating technique of 5 elements to Xiantian realm, your cultivation base is still too weak. What are you trying to craft with the flame of earth core? Wu Qi looked at Nia Yaonu smilingly, shook his head and said, Grand Elder, please activate the formation. I think this bronze cauldron can be used to craft items, right? What I'm trying to craft is not some magical treasures or items, but some materials. He, our young master is studying the formation, so he needs to deploy some formation diagrams and foundations. With a wave of his hand, he threw out a mountain of all kinds of refined iron, 100-year dark iron, and other materials from his bracelet. Looking at these materials, Nia Yaonu could not help but burst into laughter. She shook her head and said, after fighting with that old fool Yen Li for too long, I've become more and more paranoid. Well, with the cultivation base of a little kid, what else can you craft? These materials, they are actually suitable to be used to construct a low-grade formation diagram. Nia Yaonu gave these materials, the highest quality of which could only be used to craft lower-grade magical items, and immediately, she no longer had any doubts. Then, she performed a few incantation gestures, activating the formation in the crafting room. Slowly, the green light barrier underneath the 3-legged cauldron cracked open, revealing a finger-sized hole. From there, a straight red flame shot out along with an ear-splitting whistling noise. In just a blink of an eye, the entire cauldron turned red. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the surrounding earth elemental energy stones began to flash rapidly. Gradually, a heavy force pressed down from all directions, firmly restraining the scorching heat to a radius of 10 meters around the cauldron. Nia Yaonu shook her head disinterestedly, spun and walked out of the room, watching Wu Qi throw all the materials into the cauldron in a strict manner according to a certain ratio. She was in a hurry to figure out the 2-sword techniques, and did not have the mood to fool around with Wu Qi here. How big of a trouble could a little guy of Xiantian realm cause? Hastily, Wu Qi closed the thick and heavy stone door of the crafting room. He scanned the cauldron with his divine will and sensed the rapid melting of all the materials he threw into it. A complacent smile emerged on his face. The minor change universal alloy was a secret formula recorded in the scroll of stealing, and basically, no one in the world of cultivators knew about it. It was the formula that the mysterious figure who passed the scroll of stealing to Wu Qi had spent a lot of time and effort to research. As a qualified thief, the most important thing was to have a way to escape. Apart from all kinds of escape arts and techniques, what else was the best way to escape other than teleportation formations? Not only the minor universal teleportation formation, even the grand universal teleportation formation, and all kinds of teleportation formations that could teleport across galaxies, were all analyzed and explained in detail in the scroll of stealing. However, as of now, Wu Qi did not have any high-quality materials to craft those teleportation formations. Therefore, he could only stare at those crafting methods while drooling. Using his divine will, he carefully controlled the melting rate of all the various molten metals in the cauldron, then began to fuse them according to a unique dimensional crystal structure, turning these ordinary metals into the minor change universal alloy, whose value had increased by thousands of times. With the help of the flame from the Earth's core, the first minor universal teleportation formation was cast by Wu Qi 12 hours later. It was an 8 feet in diameter, 6 inches thick, translucent, pale blue, and had the same color as the sky. As it was formed in one piece, the traces of the formation, as well as the inlaid spots of various energy stones, were left on its surface. Wiping off the sweat from his forehead, Wu Qi continued his work. A single formation disc was not enough for him to teleport. Chapter 136. Therefore, he could not let Wei Xiaoxiao get her hands on the spatial breaching spirit gold. Either Wu Qi stole all the spatial breaching spirit gold from the mine, or he simply uprooted all the businesses of Lu Buwei in Ji City. If Lao Ai knew that Lu Buwei had also meddled in Ji City, what would his reaction be? His face was filled with uncertainty. While Wu Qi was pondering all sorts of ruthless thoughts, Hao Ying Fengying's voice suddenly came from the roadside. "Brother Wu, Senior Brother Wu, Marquis Wu, Marquis Tianyun, I've finally found you." With a smile on his face, Wu Qi thanked the young girls who called themselves Qing Yu and Zi Yu, then followed them into the treasure-keeping pavilion. There were many items in the treasure-keeping pavilion, but Wu Qi did not have the mood to waste his time here. He picked out a close-fitting defensive robe, a pair of magical cloud boots that could increase the speed of flying by 30%, a heart protection mirror, a 5-beam sword crown, and a pearl that could release the fog. After that, he left the treasure-keeping pavilion. When he thought of the possibility that Lu Buwei, the cunning old fox, would appear in Ji City at any time, and when he thought of the peerless evil man, Lao Ai, living in Ji City, Wu Qi felt a sharp pain in his head. If his cultivation base had already reached the realm of gold immortal, he would not have to worry about these things, as he could just strangle these people to death. However, with the current cultivation base of Lu Buwei and Lao Ai, they could easily kill him with just a finger. If he did not plan carefully, it would be impossible for him to succeed. Wu Qi raised his head up and saw Hao Ying Fengying striding out from a small path in the forest with a big smile on his face. Together with a few young men, they came to greet Wu Qi attentively. With great enthusiasm, Hao Ying Fengying grabbed both of Wu Qi's hands, laughed out loud and said, "Where is my Marquis Wu? Some time ago, I was told that you've returned to the mountain. I've been waiting here for you, but I never saw you. I don't care about anything else. I've prepared a few jars of good wine here. If you don't finish all of them today, you're not allowed to leave." The single-horned deer, whose belly was round and full, comfortably snorted, then rubbed its big head against Wu Qi's body a few times. Wu Qi did not ride on it. He pulled the reins and slowly brought it towards the gate of Baiyang Mountain. As he walked slowly, he pondered what to do next. Now that he had the minor heavenly cycle teleportation formations array disk, he needed to quickly set up a few escape routes. However, he still had to plan carefully as to how he would act. This was the way of the world. When Hao Ying Fenglong was out of luck, the market for Hao Ying Fengying would naturally increase. Hence, Wu Qi needed to befriend him. With a smile on his face, Wu Qi waved his hand and invited a few young men of the Hao Ying family who were standing behind Hao Ying Fengying into the pavilion. After that, the group of people sat down, pouring themselves a cup of wine and enjoying themselves. The scenery of the mountain here was quiet and beautiful, with no one to disturb them. The wine was 100-years-old wine, and the fruits and dishes were of the best quality. Drinking like this was indeed a great pleasure. Immediately, Wu Qi let go of the reins and drove the single-horned elk to the forest beside the road to graze, while he held Hao Ying Fengying's hand. Both of them walked side by side, laughing and walking towards a small clearing at the end of the shady path. There was a pond with a dark green color, giving off a tranquil atmosphere. The soft grass by the shore was densely covered with colorful flowers. Surrounding them was a dense bamboo forest. The sound of bamboo rustling could be heard when the wind blew. It was an extremely quiet and tranquil place. While Wu Qi sat down and drank a pot of wine, a fist-sized, golden-eyed, black-feathered pigeon flew into a house outside the imperial palace at top speed, leaving a black line behind it. Tuoba Haofeng, who was sitting in the main hall of the house, grabbed the pigeon and pulled out a small piece of paper from the bone ring on its toe. There were no words written on the paper, only the drawing of a small dagger. Both Blue Moon and Ziyu did not have the ability of Nia Yaonu using her sword beam to capture someone from a distance. As both of them were in secluded cultivation, Wu Qi had no choice but to slowly climb down the cliff using the green vines. When he was passing through a stretch of ancient pine trees, he was even chased by a few big white cranes, which gave Wu Qi a hard time. Standing on top of the cliff, Blue Moon and Ziyu were watching Wu Qi dodging the attacks of the big white cranes in a flurry, and they couldn't help but burst out laughing. Wu Qi was so angry that his nose twitched. He nearly lost control of himself and unleashed his flying sword to kill these few white cranes. It took him a lot of effort to restrain the anger in his heart. Therefore, he had no choice but to borrow the power of the earth core flame in the immortal's cave of sword stems from the mind. Wu Qi performed an incantation gesture, once again sealing the earth core flame that burst out from the cave. After that, he tidied up all the leftover materials and waste materials that splashed all over the place, and cleaned up the crafting room. After making sure there was no trash left behind, he moved the stone door of the crafting room and strode out. If not because I don't want to expose the fact that I've already formed the Jin Dan, I'll definitely kill all of you with my flying sword. Smilingly looking at these big white cranes, Wu Qi whistled. The single-horned deer he kept at the foot of the cliff responded with a cry from a distance, then leaped towards Wu Qi. It stuck out its fat tongue and licked Wu Qi's face a few times. Previously in Heaven's Will Palace, when facing the enormous pressure from Qin Shuwen, Haoying Fengying could still stand up for justice and speak up. Therefore, he could be considered as a worthy friend. Haoying Fengying pulled Wu Qi's arm, smiled and said, "I've been waiting here for a few days now. The fruits and dishes are freshly made every day, I hope brother will like them." He pulled Wu Qi's arm and respectfully led him into the pavilion, sitting on the main seat. Patting on the skinny body of the single-horned deer, Wu Qi sighed lovingly and said, "For the past 2 days, you can only eat grass, you've suffered a lot." From his storage ring, Wu Qi took out a bag of high-quality fodder and fed it to the single-horned deer, letting it eat until it was full. Then, Tuoba Haofeng tore the piece of paper in his hand and cried out sternly, "Pass down my order, get ready to strike. Somebody, follow me into the palace. Bring Miss Yu's name card with you." I don't believe that bitch Zhanglu will refuse to accept my invitation when Miss Yu personally invites me. This world was filled with a very strange atmosphere, and Wu Qi did not want to die here without any preparation. He gave this pair of teenage girls, who were obviously twin sisters. Both of them had the cultivation base of physique strengthening tier of Xiantian realm. Judging from their young age, they must be the trusted disciples of Nie Yaonu, who had meticulously trained them. Last time, when Wu Qi came to steal the dustless lamp in the middle of the night, he did not sense the similar aura of these 2 teenage girls. Apparently, Nie Yaonu's trump card was not only this immortal's cave, and she must have other mansions in other places. The sky had just brightened, and the sun had just risen 30 feet into the sky. There was still some fog that had yet to disperse. Crafting the minor universal teleportation formation was a strenuous task. After Wu Qi had familiarized himself with the crafting process, his speed became faster and faster. Finally, 12 days later, he had successfully crafted over 180 formation discs, and stored all of them in his storage ring. Apart from these formation discs, he had also crafted several hundreds of formation discs of various sizes, made from ordinary metals, ranging from 1 origin formation to 6 direction formation. He planned to give them to Lu Qingfeng and himself, who could also use them. While shouting and laughing all the way, Wu Qi gave 2 middle fingers to the big white cranes that were flying towards him from the sky. While laughing wildly, he picked up a rock from the ground, casually pinched it into countless pebbles, and threw them towards those big birds. The pebbles pierced through the air and accurately hit on the necks of these big birds. The pain made them scream and soar up into the sky, not daring to come down and fight with Wu Qi again. Between the bamboo forest and the pond, there was a small pavilion, built using the bark of pine and cypress trees that were pulled out from the ground. Currently, there were a few cushions, a few short tables, 10 jars of fine wine, and some delicious fruits and delicacies placed in the pavilion. It was neatly and tidily arranged. After forming the Jin Dan, the cultivator would be able to craft items with the Samadhi True Flame. But too bad, the 2 Jin Dan formed by Wu Qi were innate water elemental. Although they had a mighty power, they could not control the flame. Also, he could not control the divine flame of order freely. Using this innate divine flame, which ranked in the top 5 in the entire universe, to craft a formation disc was really overkill. Nie Yaonu and Nie Baiheng were nowhere to be seen. Only a pair of teenage girls, clad in a light yellow short skirt and a light green shirt, were waiting outside the door to welcome Wu Qi. Both of them told him with a gentle tone that both Nia Yaonu and Nia Baihong were in a secluded cultivation, trying to comprehend the sword technique. He could leave after he was done with the task, and when Nia Baihong had achieved some success in comprehending the sword technique, she would pay him a visit in Ji City. A couple dozens of dark shadows flashed across the courtyard at top speed, leaving behind a faint, almost inaudible sound of wind piercing. While dragging Wu Qi and walking towards the small path in the woods, Haoying Fengying said with great hospitality, "I have to thank my brother." Haoying Fenglong was sent to the northernmost region by His Majesty to build a city and establish his business. As his foundation is unstable, he will never be able to return to Ji City for the rest of his life. Once he left, the power of his branch will be greatly reduced, and my status in Haoying clan has risen rapidly. It is all thanks to my brother. These items were all mid-grade magical items, and could be used by injecting a little bit of divine sense into them. On the spot, Wu Qi changed into a treasured outfit, a pair of cloud boots, and a protective mirror. He hid the pearl under his sleeve, and fastened the sword crown on his head with a ribbon. With his hair that was neither too long nor too short now, the sword crown could barely fit on his head. The sword crown took the shape of 5 dragons circling around the moon, and a cold gleam could be vaguely seen in each of the 5 dragon heads. They were actually 5 tiny flying swords, and as long as the divine sense was activated, they could transform into cold gleams and hurt people. Very soon, the coach was ready. Tuoba Haofeng boarded the coach and brought a large group of guards, heading straight for the imperial palace. When Haoying Fenglong was forced to build a city and establish his own country in the northernmost snowland, Wu Qi smiled. No matter what, Haoying clan was still in charge of the position of criminal and minister, which was the highest position among the 3 prime ministers and 9 ministers of Great Yen dynasty. If he could rope Haoying Fengying to his side and make him his man, at least the incident where he was framed at the city gate would not happen again, and he would have another helper in Ji City. After putting on a few magical items that he had obtained for free, Wu Qi thanked Blue Moon and Purple Moon, then left the cave under their guidance. Both young ladies also told him that there were 3 treasure chambers in the cave, and many items that could be used by cultivators were kept in those chambers. As for Wu Qi, he was given the credit of learning the sword technique, so he was allowed to pick 5 or less treasures from the treasure chambers and bring them away. As for Wei clan, what Wei merchant wanted was the spatial breaching spirit gold, which was found under the 2 iron ores in Lu Qingfeng's territory. Such a precious treasure could not be left to Wei merchant. The cultivation base of Lu Buwei was at least an earth immortal of nascent soul realm, and because of the limitation of the 5 ghosts transportation technique, he could only travel around the world laboriously. If he could find enough spatial breaching spirit gold with a large enough volume, he could build a super long-distance teleportation formation. With that, he would be able to quickly bring a large number of men and travel around the world. It had been quite some time since Lu Qingfeng became Zuoguizheng, and Yan Dan had only given him 1 year to make a contribution. No matter what, Yan Dan had to come up with a good plan for Lu Qingfeng. Whether it was a face-saving project or a political achievement project, in the near future, he had to make Lu Qingfeng gain some fame and reputation as soon as possible. Although he had spared the lives of a few white cranes, Wu Qi did not want to let them have a good time. When he was climbing over those ancient pines, he forcefully kicked a few huge cranes' nests off the branches, falling down into the deep cliff. A large flock of white cranes flapped their wings and flew up into the sky, crying shrilly in panic. Meanwhile, Wu Qi was laughing out loud, climbing all the way to the bottom of the cliff. Blue Moon and Purple Moon's laughter came to an abrupt stop. The sisters stared at Wu Qi, who was as tiny as a sesame seed, and felt a suffocating feeling in their hearts. This man was too unreliable. How could he be so calculative with a bunch of feathered animals? Chapter 137. Deep within the imperial palace of Great Yen dynasty, in a palace that occupied a vast area, Princess Zhanglu was seen lying on a large bed, lost in thought. Through a few layers of pale green gauze curtains, one could see that the sun was shining brightly outside. Together with some palace maids, Bai Zhu'er and Bai Zu'er were quietly entering and exiting the room, tidying up all sorts of miscellaneous items. In Princess Zhongli's bedchamber, not to mention the luxurious furnishings, there were 3 huge jade tables carved with floral patterns placed right in the center of the room, which made them extremely eye-catching. On one of the tables were placed several dozens of chess boards made from different materials, but all of them were extremely precious and rare. The chess pieces were made from precious gems, gemstones, pearls, and many other precious materials. Countless chess pieces were piled messily on the chessboard, scattering on the pale green carpet. Together with a few palace maids, Bai Zhu'er was quietly picking up these chess pieces, sorting them into different categories and placing them into the chess boxes carved from jade. On the other table, a dozen jade zither were piled up messily. All of these zither were ancient and colorful, and were made from various rare and precious spirit woods and spirit jades. The strings were either made from the tendons of flood dragons, or the threads of 10,000 years old spirit creatures, or the long threads melted and condensed from spirit jades of water element. All of them were extremely rare items in the world. On the last table, a couple dozens of large drawing papers were spread out, as white as snowflakes. On a few of them, countless characters were written in small characters, all of which were the poem Lovers from the South and the North, which was plagiarized by Wu Qi. Perhaps, he had written the poem several hundred times, over and over again. On the other drawing papers, ink and brush were dripping, messy. No one could tell what was written on them. If Wu Qi were here, he would comment that these words looked like the graffiti of a 3-year-old kid, and did not have the slightest foundation in painting. The tree he drew looked like a featherless chicken claw, and the person he drew looked like a matchstick stuck in dough. The animals he drew looked like they had been washed and stripped clean, and had been stewed in a pot of soup until they became deformed. A few high-quality inkstones were dripping with ink, and dozens of fine brushes made from the fur of demon beasts were randomly thrown onto the jade table. The jade table with a radius of several zhang was in a mess, as if dozens of wild dogs had ravaged it. Meanwhile, Bai Zhu'er and Bai Zu'er, together with a dozen or so palace maids, began to tidy up all the items in the chamber, restoring them to their original state as quickly as possible. Princess Zhonglu was lying on the bed with her hair disheveled. She tilted her head and watched them work. She swung her bare feet back and forth, her light pink toes picking up the thin blanket from time to time and waving it around. After a long while, when she saw that Bai Zhu'er and the others were almost done with their work, Princess Zhonglu yawned lazily and said, Zhu'er, do you think it's better for me to get up now, or go back to sleep? Clapping her hands, Bai Zhu'er came before Princess Zhongli's window, bent over and said with a smile on her face, Princess, you better get up quickly. For the past 2 days, apart from doing your homework at night, you've been sleeping all the time. Even if you've formed the Jin Dan, do you think it's good for your health? Holding her chin with both hands, Princess Zhonglu breathed out a long sigh and said, What should I do if I get up? Grandpa couldn't figure it out this time, so he came out to govern the city. No one in G City dares to cause any trouble, and we can't even watch the show. That little fellow, Wu Qi, has actually gone to heaven-breaking sword sect for some unknown reason. I haven't seen him for more than 10 days. Tell me, what could he be doing in heaven-breaking sword sect? He even borrowed Sister Lady Medicine's crafting room to craft something. He better not burn down the immortal's cave of sword stems from the mind. Bai Zhu'er smiled. Deftly, she tied up Princess Zhongli's hair into a bun, and carefully combed her hair until not a single strand of hair was out of place. It looked like she had gotten used to combing Princess Zhongli's hair when she was still lying on the bed. Although the posture was not right, the quality of the bun was impeccable. While she was busy, she smiled and said, It's hard to say. Didn't Marquis Wu buy a lot of metals and materials from Market of Four Seas? Perhaps he wants to craft a sword, or perhaps he wants to craft something else. A Taoist of Xiantian realm can also craft something nice. Twitching her lips, Princess Zhonglu twisted her body, frowned and said unhappily, If he wants something, he can just tell me directly. I'll get it from the Imperial Treasury. Why does he have to work so hard himself? Really, he has wasted more than 10 days of time, and he doesn't even know how to spend the time with me. Bai Zhu'er dared not to say anything, but kept busy helping Princess Xianglu to tie up her hair into a bun. Sighing lightly, Princess Xianglu waved her hand casually. Immediately, several dozens of gauze curtains hanging down from the ceiling in the bedchamber flew up and hung on the hooks next to her. One of the walls of the bedchamber slowly opened up, revealing a huge room, measuring several hundred feet in both width and length. Neatly arranged sandalwood racks were piled with all kinds of clothes. Tilting her head, Princess Xianglu looked at the room and asked worriedly, "What kind of dress should I wear today?" "No matter how you look at it, I have so many dresses, but I only have 2 or 3. The same color, the same appearance, what a headache." Sighing faintly, Princess Xianglu twitched her mouth and asked in a daze, "What should I eat for breakfast? Still lotus seed cake and 5 meters of porridge? Change to something else? But what should I eat? Ugh, strange, why should I eat breakfast now? As a Jin Dan human immortal, I can eat the wind and drink the dew." Her pretty face suddenly turned gloomy. Looking up into the sky, Princess Xianglu breathed out a long sigh and said, "How pitiful, I can't even eat breakfast. Eating the wind and drink the dew, isn't that the same as drinking the northwest wind? Compared to this, it's better to eat breakfast." With a gloomy face, Princess Xianglu tilted her head again, frowned and murmured to herself, "Will Wu Qi go down the mountain today? Not go down the mountain. Go down the mountain. Not go down the mountain. If he still doesn't come out, I'll just rush into the Immortal's cave and drag him out. But, the sword stems from the mind has a very tight restrictive spell, there's no way I can rush into the Immortal's cave. Even Grandpa Emperor can't do it, let alone me. What is Sister Yaonu doing? Why is she in seclusion?" After sighing for a while, Princess Xianglu continued to worry, "If Wu Qi go down the mountain today, what kind of clothes should I wear to meet him? What kind of shoes should I wear? What kind of jewelry should I wear on my head? Does he like delicate jewelry or elegant jewelry? Heavy makeup or light makeup? Light makeup. Heavy makeup makes my face so uncomfortable." A bird cry was heard, and a green bird with a long tail, shaped like a peacock, but only the size of a palm, flew down from the sky at a high speed and crashed into the bedchamber. Seeing Princess Xianglu, the bird flapped its wings happily and flew toward Princess Xianglu. Princess Xianglu was startled at first, then overjoyed. She grabbed the bird with one hand and pulled out a small golden ring from under its wing in an extremely barbaric manner, then took out a small paper scroll from inside. On it was a secret mark of the scouting office, as well as a simple sentence, "Marquis Tianyun has left the Immortal's cave, sword stems from the heart." Great! Princess Xianglu threw the bird in her hand out. The bird was caught unprepared, and was smashed onto the table by Princess Xianglu. The poor bird rolled its eyes and fell to the ground, its wings and legs twitching. Princess Xianglu had already jumped off the bed and shouted, "Quick, help me change my clothes and make up. Hurry, hurry, go to the city gate and stop Wu Qi. This time, he must accompany me to Zhang Li's garden for a month." Palace maids quickly rushed over and helped Princess Xianglu change her clothes and make up her clothes at the quickest speed. Right after everything was done, Princess Xianglu held a bowl of porridge in her left hand and took 2 mouthfuls of porridge, while her right hand held 2 snacks and quickly swallowed them. After that, she brought Bai Zhu'er and ran out of the palace. 8 ghost immortals, each shrouded in towering yin energy, and several hundred palace guards quickly followed behind, surrounding Princess Xianglu in the middle. Right after the procession walked out of Princess Zhang bedchamber, went around a few palaces, and was about to leave the palace, Tuoba Haofeng had already entered the palace with a few attendants, followed by a few imperial eunuchs, and just happened to bump into Princess Zhang procession. Sitting in the coach, Princess Zhang face darkened when she saw Tuoba Haofeng's smiling face. Without hesitation, she gave out an order, "Somebody, break Tuoba Haofeng's limbs and throw him out of the palace." Do you really think I'm so easy to deceive? That dead bastard Tuoba Qingye is not a good man, and you, Tuoba Haofeng, are not a good man either. Since you purposely came to trouble Wu Qi, you must be a bad man. Somebody, break him, break his limbs and throw him out of the palace. Immediately, over 30 palace guards leaped forward like wolves and tigers, pressing down on Tuoba Haofeng, who dared not to resist, and were about to give him a brutal beating. Tuoba Haofeng, whose heart was filled with hatred, hastily cried out, "Your Highness, Princess Xianglu, the purpose of your humble servant's visit is to deliver young Miss Yu's invitation card. Young Miss Yu is holding a poetry and painting meeting on the myriad Red River, and she has invited all the most famous talented men and women in Ji City. Your humble servant dares not to offend your Highness. Young Miss Yu knows that I can enter the palace to meet your Highness, and that's why she asked me to bring this invitation card to your Highness." Princess Xianglu was struck dumb. She frowned and asked, "Poetry and painting meeting? Young Miss Yu Qianqian's poetry and painting meeting? Why didn't I know anything about it?" Tuoba Haofeng let out a few hollow laughs. Carefully, he glanced around at the palace guards who were pressing down on him and a few of his attendants. He snorted coldly, then said with a deep voice, "Release him." "Tuoba Haofeng, I'm usually the first one to know about Yu Qianqian's poetry and painting meeting. Why do you need to deliver the invitation card this time?" Carefully, Tuoba Haofeng handed over a light green name card to one of the palace guards, asking the guard to hand it over to Princess Xianglu. Princess Xianglu opened the name card and gave it a glance, then casually handed it over to Bai Zhuer. After that, she turned to look at Tuoba Haofeng and said, "Tell me, why didn't I hear anything about it this time?" Tuoba Haofeng bowed his head and said carefully, "Young Miss Yu's poetry and painting meeting is just an impromptu idea. The meeting is going to last for 7 days, allowing everyone to display their talents to their heart's content, and strive to produce some exquisite poems and paintings. Today is already the 3rd day. Initially, I wanted to inform Princess earlier, but Princess has been in a bad mood for the past few days. However, young Miss Yu has asked about Princess again today. That's why I boldly entered the palace." Princess Xianglu was struck dumb. She glared at Tuoba Haofeng and snapped, "Do I have a bad temper?" An invisible pressure came whistling out, forcing Tuoba Haofeng and a few of his attendants to stagger backward. Tuoba Haofeng was the first to bear the brunt of the pressure, coughing out a mouthful of blood on the spot. Princess Xianglu was taken aback, then she smiled embarrassedly and said, "Zhuer, is it true that I have a bad temper these past few days?" Bai Zhuer smiled faintly and said nothing. Shaking her head, Princess Xianglu frowned and said, "Tuoba Haofeng, bring me to the meeting at the myriad Red River. Zhuer, bring some men and wait for Marquis Wu at the city gate. When he arrives, ask him to look for us at the myriad Red River. Tell him, if he doesn't come, I'll tear down Duke Yan Li's mansion when I return to the city." Bai Zhuer answered hastily, then brought a couple dozens of palace guards and left on another coach. Princess Xianglu and her company went to the myriad Red River. At the same time, Lu Qingfeng was invited by a few important ministers of Great Yan dynasty to a restaurant for a banquet. The last man in Ji City who had a friendly relationship with Wu Qi, Yan Zhouhui, was summoned by Qin Qingshui to the Central Wind Guard of Scouting Office, to participate in the so-called internal purging meeting of Scouting Office. All the people in Ji City who were close to Wu Qi, who had power and information channels, and who could come to his rescue had been transferred away. Chapter 138. His mouth was filled with the fragrant aftertaste of the wine. Wu Qi laughed and waved goodbye to Haoying Fengying. The banquet took Wu Qi 4 hours. 10 jars of fine wine that had aged over 100 years old were worth the time to savor the aftertaste. These 10 jugs of century-old wine were brewed using the secret technique of the Haoying clan. It was called the 100-fruit and 100-flower honey wine. It was sweet, fragrant, and extremely fragrant, and it had the effect of strengthening the soul and strengthening the vitality of a cultivator. Usually, it was used as a spirit medicine as a tribute, and it was offered to Yan Dan and various members of the imperial clan who held great power during the new year. After drinking the wine, Wu Qi felt a little intoxicated. When he walked, his head felt heavy and his feet felt light, and his mind was not as agile as before. The wine was good, but it was too strong. Wu Qi didn't want to use his innate energy to force out the wine, as it would be a waste of this fine wine. Since Haoying Fengying had brought him such a fine wine, he had to let it stay in his stomach and slowly digest it. By befriending Haoying Fengying, not only would he have a helper in heaven-breaking sword sect, he could also form a relationship with Haoying clan. This was a good thing. Riding on the single-horned deer, Wu Qi laughed, spurred the horse and left Mount White Sunday. The sun was high up in the sky, and it was noon. If he rushed back to Ji City, he could still make it in time to have lunch with Lu Qingfeng. Apart from the minor universal teleportation formation, Wu Qi had also crafted several hundred formation discs of various colors. He wanted to give all of them to Lu Qingfeng, as he was, after all, studying the Tao of formation, and they would be very helpful to him. With about 70 to 80% of the wine in his body, Wu Qi left Mount White Sun, laughing and singing along the way. Perhaps Wu Qi felt that he had not drunk enough, as he took out another wine jar the size of a human head from his storage ring. He kept pouring wine into his mouth while walking along the main road towards Ji City. The condition of the roads in Great Yan Dynasty was very good. Not only were the roads flat and wide, both sides of the roads were planted with towering trees that stood over 20 feet tall. The shade of the trees formed a huge canopy that blocked the sunlight. The road was cool and refreshing, and no one could feel the heat from the sun. Riding the single-horned elk on the main road, Wu Qi drank wine and tore open his clothes, revealing a large part of his chest, singing loudly all the way. For some unknown reason, although the main road leading to Ji City was usually crowded with carriages and pedestrians, Wu Qi was the only one walking on the road today. Looking ahead and back along the straight road, he couldn't see a single person for several tens of li. However, Wu Qi, who was still intoxicated, did not notice this. He continued to enjoy the cool breeze all the way, singing and drinking to his heart's content. All of a sudden, a barely discernible cry came from a patch of reed-like grass under a few trees by the roadside. "Help! Help!" The cry for help came from a woman's gentle voice. Along with the cry for help came the sound of a dozen or so people hurriedly flying away. The wind came blowing from the patch of grass, bringing a pungent smell of blood to Wu Qi's nostrils. Casually, Wu Qi threw away the wine jar, laughed wildly and leaped into the air. With just a few steps, he arrived at the patch of grass, casually throwing out a punch. A muffled boom rang out, and the patch of grass within the circumference of several tens of feet was shattered into pieces by the force of the punch. Countless bits of grass were blown away by the strong wind, revealing two broken carriages lying in the grass patch. They were two luxurious carriages inlaid with gold and jade. Those who could ride in such carriages were either rich or noble. But now, the carriages were violently smashed into pieces like firewood. 6 magnificent beasts were lying next to the carriages. Next to the beasts were over 30 men, who were no longer breathing. Their necks were nearly chopped off, and a large amount of internal organs were oozing out from the hideous wounds on their bodies. The strong wind came blowing from the front, bringing the gentle voice of a woman. The woman was still screaming for help, but very soon, her mouth seemed to be muffled, and she could no longer make any sound. The sound of breaking wind went further and further away, and before long, it had already traveled a few miles away. Wu Qi's ears twitched, and his divine sense had already locked onto the sound that was going further away. He laughed in a strange tone and said indifferently, "Old trick, really too old trick. Luring the enemy deep in, luring the snake out of its hole, ambushing from 10 sides, what else can I say except old trick? But, for a young hero with a sense of justice like me, aren't I born for this kind of scene?" Then, he patted the head of the single-horned deer. The deer let out a long and sonorous cry, then chased after the direction where the sound of breaking wind had disappeared like a gust of wind. While gulping down the wine, Wu Qi raised his head and shouted to the sky, "Young lady, don't worry, with me here, no one can touch a single hair of yours." "Hey, You bastards, in broad daylight, you're raping innocent women. Is there any justice left in this world? Is there any law left? While yelling all sorts of nonsense, Wu Qi rode his horse and chased after them for several dozens of miles. Above a large expanse of long grass, he saw a group of dozens of men in black, leaping out from the grass from time to time, stepping on the tips of the grass and sprinting forward at top speed. These men had the cultivation base of peak Ho Tian realm, and that was why they could step on the grass and fly forward at top speed. However, their meridians were not long enough, and after they sprinted forward for a short distance, they would have to land on the grass and catch their breath. That was why Wu Qi could catch up with them so easily. On the shoulder of the leading man in black, there was a young girl, who was clad in a long white dress and had her mouth stuffed with a piece of white cloth. The young girl was struggling with all her might. Once in a while, she raised her head and saw Wu Qi approaching her at top speed from a distance of several hundred feet away. Her beautiful big eyes were filled with a boundless joy. Hastily, she turned to look at Wu Qi and tried her best to let out a cry for help. Once again, Wu Qi cried out with a stern voice, "You bastard! How can we allow people like you to do whatever you want in the territory of Great Yan Dynasty? Quickly follow me into the city, and I might still be able to beg for mercy in front of His Majesty. You are robbing girls right outside of Ji City. This is not giving His Majesty any face, you are slapping His Majesty's face." Wu Qi continued with a loud voice, "If it was during the period when 8 princes were supervising the state, I would have nothing to say when you are slapping their face. But, during these 2 months, His Majesty has come out from his secluded cultivation and personally came to the imperial court to handle the state affairs. How dare you commit such an illegal act during the period when His Majesty is ruling the state? You are not giving His Majesty any face. You, all of you should have your entire clan executed." Suddenly, the group of fleeing men in black halted their steps. A cold gleam flashed, as a dozen oddly shaped long blades spun in all directions, slicing out an empty space of several tens of feet in circumference in the middle of the long grass. Surprisingly, these men in black had formed a standard formation that could only be found in an army, charging towards Wu Qi with a defensive stance and an offensive stance. The leader of the men in black cried out sternly, "This fellow is annoying. Let's kill him and continue our journey." These men in black raised their left hands. Suddenly, a large sheet of cold gleam shot out from under their sleeves, as countless tiny needles that were as fine as cow hair were activated by a machine. Together with a faint fishy aroma, they thrust towards Wu Qi. These needles were even finer than cow hair, and they took on a dark red hue. Together with the strange poisonous aroma, one could easily tell that these needles were dipped in a deadly poison. Wu Qi let out a loud laugh, then forcefully shook the wine jar in his hand. The wine inside the jar clattered noisily, and countless crystal-clear water droplets shot out from the jar, accurately hitting nearly 1,000 tiny needles. The needles were knocked back by the wine and pierced into the bodies of those men in black. These men in black let out miserable howls, while a large amount of white smoke rose from their bodies. In just a blink of an eye, their bodies had turned into a puddle of pus. Wu Qi could not help but gasp and murmured, "This is indeed the world of immortals, where one can fly freely in the sky and burrow underground. Even this deadly poison is so deadly, many times more poisonous than the prickles I brought out from Meng Mountains. TSK, even if it is just aqua regia, how long would it take to corrode a person into a puddle of pus?" Shaking his head and sighing, Wu Qi leaped down from his mount, staggered a little, and slowly walked towards the girl who was thrown onto the empty ground by the leader of the men in black. After burping a few times, Wu Qi shouted from afar, Miss, are you all right?" Seeing that your clothes are still intact, I suppose the most important thing for a woman is still with you. You should be fine." As he staggered a few feet away from the girl had already pulled off the white cloth that covered her mouth. Panicked, the pretty girl threw herself at Wu Qi's thigh and said, "Save me, my benefactor, please save me. I'm in a great calamity, please take pity on me." Laughing wildly, Wu Qi thrust his leg up and gave the girl a heavy kick on her face, sending her flying several hundred feet away. The girl waved her arms and legs in the air, howling miserably. A large amount of blood sprayed out from her mouth, and at the same time, a large handful of white and shiny teeth sprayed out from her mouth. The girl screamed miserably and fell heavily to the ground. After a long time, she stood up tremblingly from the ground. The girl, who had a large black footprint in the middle of her face and blood kept gushing out from her mouth, cried out in a stern voice, "Wu Qi, how did you find out my flaw?" She turned her left hand over, and a strangely shaped dagger appeared in the girl's hand. The dagger was no longer than a finger, and was as thin as a cicada's wing and as narrow as a willow leaf. The dagger was completely black, as if it had been coated with a thick layer of black paint. At first glance, anyone could tell that this dagger had been dipped in poison. If she had approached Wu Qi just now, as long as this dagger slightly scratched Wu Qi's thigh, nothing good would have happened to him. Staring at the dagger in the girl's hand, Wu Qi, dumbfounded, and couldn't believe it. He dropped the wine jar and gave the girl an answer that he didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. You're with these bandits. Heavens, luckily this marquis is lucky. This marquis has drunk too much, and kicking people has already become a habit. As soon as I saw you pouncing towards this marquis, your head looked as round as a ball. The girl was stunned, letting the blood drip down from her chin and stain her clothes. After a full 3 breaths of time, the girl finally raised her head and screamed in exasperation, "Wu Qi, how dare you make fun of me? I don't care if you're just used to it, or if you've really found out that something is wrong. You're dead today. All of you, come out and kill this bastard for me." Suddenly, the sound of sharp swords being unsheathed rang out from several thousand feet away. Sword lights flashed in all directions. At least 32 warriors of body-strengthening tier of Xiantian realm and above were walking slowly towards Wu Qi with swords in their hands. Behind those Xiantian warriors came the sound of orderly and heavy footsteps. Wu Qi's ears twitched slightly. Judging from the sound, he could tell that he was surrounded by at least 3,000 well-trained soldiers. For a Xiantian warrior, it was extremely difficult to kill a real Xiantian warrior, no matter if it was an army of thousands of men and horses, or a group of warriors of the same level. Only by using a group of Xiantian warriors who had an absolute advantage, and then using a large number of soldiers to besiege the enemy, could they have a 100% chance of killing a Xiantian warrior. 32 Xiantian warriors of physique strengthening tier and more than 3,000 elite soldiers. They wouldn't stop until they killed Wu Qi. Sighing lightly, Wu Qi looked at the 32 warriors, who were approaching him step by step, and said in a long voice, "It's not just these people, right? Are there any more ambushes? Come out. It looks like I'm going to die here. Show me all the arrangements you've made, so that I can die in peace." After a long silence, a gust of wind suddenly rolled up from the ground, and on top of a small mound 3 miles away, 2 Jin Dan human immortal cultivators appeared out of nowhere. One of them shouted in a low voice, "Wu Qi, you're going to die here today." Chapter 139. He took out a jar of wine from his storage ring and drank 2 mouthfuls of it. After that, Wu Qi looked at the group of 32 warriors of Xiantian realm who were approaching him, and the several thousand soldiers who were hiding behind the tall grasses in all directions. Suddenly, he let out a loud laugh and said, "Am I going to die here today? Hee, you have mobilized the army without permission, and that is a serious crime. A serious crime. But, this is not right, not right." After a few laughs, Wu Qi's smile froze abruptly. Bewildered, he sprung up and stood on the tip of a tall grass, frowning as he stared at those soldiers who were approaching him from all directions. These 3,000 elite soldiers were grouped in groups of 3 to 5, forming a siege formation that covered an area of 10 miles in circumference. Each of them stood over 9 feet tall, looking strong and muscular. Judging from the aura emanated from them, they were all peak stage Hotian warriors. 3,000 peak stage Hotian soldiers, even Little Meng City couldn't gather so many experts in such a short period of time. Also, Great Yen Dynasty had never heard of any army that consisted entirely of peak-stage Hotian warriors. Furthermore, the armor worn by these soldiers was not the green or black armor commonly used by Great Yen Dynasty's army. Instead, they were wearing a crimson battle skirt, and the armor they wore was a striking chain mail made of pale golden fish scales. There were 3 layers of armor inside and outside the armor, and on the outside was a thick and heavy plate armor made from refined steel. With an armor like this, even a full-force strike from a Xiantian warrior would not be able to hurt the person inside. On top of that, all these soldiers were wearing a metal mask with a grin on their face. 2 small prismatic crystals were mounted on their eyes, covering their eyes tightly, making it impossible to see the changes in their expressions and the direction they were looking at. The armor covered their entire body from top to bottom, and even their palms were covered by a steel gauntlet. Not a single bit of skin and flesh could be seen on their bodies. This was not the standard army of Great Yen Dynasty, but the private army of some powerful clan. Wu Qi laughed dryly and said, "I never thought there would be such a strong force in Ji City. TSK, is it really necessary for you to do this just for Wu Qi?" After being kicked by him, the girl's tall nose collapsed, her silver teeth fell out, and blood flowed out of her mouth. She scolded him sternly, "Cut the crap. You will die here today." Wu Qi, Marquis Tianyun, how long have you been in Ji City? How many people have you ruined? Do you have any idea how many people in Ji City want you dead? All of you, attack and cut him into pieces. Innocently shrugging his shoulders at the girl, Wu Qi forced a smile and said, "Am I that sinful? How many people can't wait for me to die?" Although that was what he said, Wu Qi gave it a careful thought. Perhaps, there were quite a number of people in Ji City who wished for his death. Qin Qingshui, Haoying clan, Taba Ao, Wei Xiaoxiao, and some other people who were involved in this matter, perhaps all of them wanted to hack him into pieces. While Wu Qi was about to argue with the girl again, the group of 32 Xiantian warriors did not give Wu Qi the chance to speak any further. 4 sword beams leaped up into the sky, transforming into 4 lightning bolts and thrusting towards Wu Qi's vital body parts. The other 28 sword beams flashed across the sky, following the trajectory of 28 constellations in the sky, wheeling rapidly around the spot where Wu Qi was standing, sealing off the surrounding area. Breathing out a long sigh, Wu Qi threw away the wine jar in his hand, shook his head helplessly and said, "I have a feeling that I'm the main character in a novel who is ruined." Of course, you don't know what a novel is, and you won't understand that it's impossible for you to kill a monstrous main character like me. A wolf howl soared into the sky, as the sword of greedy wolf transformed into a 10 feet long dark beam and thrust out whistling. 7 shadows of wolf heads, each the size of a human head, wheeled and slammed around the dark beam, bringing up an immense cold air. The piercingly cold sword energy spread in all directions, shredding all the tall grasses in the surroundings. Then, they transformed into a several hundred feet tall green wind dragon and soared into the sky. The sword beam flashed, and the heads of 4 Xiantian warriors flew high up into the sky. Their blood sprayed and splashed all over the sky. The sword of greedy wolf had chopped off the heads of 4 Xiantian warriors who were waving their swords at Wu Qi, devouring all their blood essence and souls, leaving nothing for Wu Qi. Suddenly, a faint blood-red hue burst out from the pitch-black body of the sword of greedy wolf, as a wolf howl that could shake one's soul was heard faintly echoing out. The faces of the surrounding Xiantian warriors fell instantly. Controlling the sword beam to protect himself, Wu Qi's eyes flashed with a strange, 4-colored gleam. Looking at those Xiantian warriors, he grinned hideously and said, "Today, I'll let you know how big the gap is between you, a cultivator with spirit root and a bunch of warriors of Xiantian realm." Then, he pointed his finger out. The 7 wolf heads near the dark beam transformed from the sword of greedy wolf let out a wild howl, then leaped towards the 28 warriors together with an immense cold air. Blood-red light kept flashing and flashing. Wherever the wolf heads passed, no matter it was a sword or a human body, they were all shattered into pieces. 28 human bodies, which were brimming with blood and qi, were ripped to shreds. Before their blood and flesh could spray out even 1 foot away, all their blood essence had been devoured by the sword of greedy wolf. Eventually, the broken bodies fell to the ground, turning into grayish-white dried meat powder. Suddenly, the sword of greedy wolf let out a joyful cry, while the blood-red hue on its body grew stronger. Kill! A deep, muffled battle cry soared up into the sky, as 100 soldiers formed a triangular formation and charged towards Wu Qi. Their steps were as loud as thunder, their blades as bright as snow, and their iron spears as thick as a forest. Behind them, 12 archers pulled the trigger of their crossbows and shot towards Wu Qi. 108 pure steel bolts were shot whistling through the air, piercing straight towards Wu Qi's body. The momentum of this charge from 100 soldiers was comparable to the murderous aura and killing intent emanated from an ordinary army of 3,000 soldiers. Ridiculous! Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he sneered and said, "I'm a cultivator, not a warrior of Xiantian realm. The sword of greedy wolf in my hand is a lower-tier magical treasure." Pointing his finger out, he injected a stream of innate energy into the sword of greedy wolf. Abruptly, the sword buzzed, and a clump of airwave exploded on the sword beam. Before the pure steel bolts could get close to Wu Qi, they were twisted and broken by the pale black airwave. The black sword beam streaked out like a waterfall. Wherever it went, 3 layers of armors were torn apart like pieces of paper, human bodies were ripped apart, weapons were broken, and broken limbs were piled up on the ground. In just 2 breaths of time, all 100 soldiers who charged towards Wu Qi were killed on the spot. After devouring a great amount of energy essence and blood essence, the sword of greedy wolf let out a joyful cry. The murderous aura emanating from it grew stronger and stronger, and the connection between it and Wu Qi's divine sense became even closer. Vaguely, there was even a sense of intimacy, as if it was a child, being transmitted to Wu Qi. This strange weapon, which had been lying idle in the cave abode of sword stems from the mind for many years, had finally drunk its fill of blood today. Instinctively, it had taken Wu Qi, who was controlling it to kill, as its real parent. With great astonishment, the white-clothed girl stared at the warriors of Xiantian realm and 100 soldiers who were easily killed by Wu Qi. With her body trembling, she cried out, "How could your ability of controlling a sword be so strong? Honorable patriarchs, please lend me a hand." 2 Jin Dan human immortals, who were standing idly on a small hill a few miles away, could no longer hold their ground. When Wu Qi killed 32 warriors of Xiantian realm, they had begun to approach the battlefield. When Wu Qi killed 100 elite soldiers with a single sword strike, they were only less than 2,000 feet away from the battlefield, and had surrounded Wu Qi from the front and back. Both of them stared at Wu Qi with a stern look in their eyes. 2 sword beams, 1 green and 1 white, each about 8 feet long, were aimed at Wu Qi from a distance. "We've made a mistake." One of the Jin Dan human immortals stared at Wu Qi, sneered, and said, "I thought we don't have to do anything, as we can kill you here. But I never thought that you are such a tough nut to crack, and even need us, 2 mighty immortals, to deal with a junior like you." Sword cries towered into the sky, as strange signs appeared behind the 2 Jin Dan human immortals at the same time. They should be cultivating the same sword technique, as a forest of swords emerged behind them at the same time. Countless tiny and sharp swords soared into the sky, emanating razor-sharp sword energies that filled the air. Within an area of 1,000 feet, all the tall grasses and shrubs were sliced into pieces. Although the strange signs of these 2 human immortals were filled with murderous auras, in Wu Qi's eyes, their sword techniques were far weaker than the ones cultivated by the Jin Dan human immortals of heaven-breaking sword sect. The forest of swords behind them was scattered but not condensed, and the sword beams they emitted were drifting in and out of focus. Obviously, their core energies had not truly condensed yet. Compared to the Jin Dan human immortals of heaven-breaking sword sect who specialized in cultivating the Tao of swords, although they were also Jin Dan human immortals, their actual strength was far weaker. However, no matter what, they were human immortals of Jin Dan. Although Wu Qi had formed a Jin Dan, he was unwilling to expose his true cultivation in front of them. Always keeping a trump card was the way to survive in this world. A player who revealed all his trump cards would only end up being wiped clean by his opponent. He casually took out an explosive talisman and threw it into the sky. The talisman, which was infused with vital energy, shot up 1,000 feet into the sky like an arrow, and exploded abruptly in the air. Amidst the loud explosion, Wu Qi cried out with a stern voice, 80 wild female bears have just arrived in the bear den in the beast garden of the imperial palace. Each of them is still a virgin. Whoever has contributed a great merit today, I'll let him enter the bear den and enjoy for 3 days. Along with Wu Qi's loud roar, the roars of beasts that caused the earth to tremble suddenly came from all directions. 6 wild bears, ranging from 20 to 30 feet in height, were covered with green fur, and under their fur were thick dark green scales. Their eyes were red, and their mouths were wide open, spraying white saliva. They leaped up from the tall grass in the distance, stepped on a violent demon wind, and dashed toward Wu Qi and Wu Qi with a deafening noise. Wherever they passed, a violent wind would wreak havoc. Before those heavily armored elite soldiers could react, they were swept up into the sky by the violent wind and fell to the ground, half dead. The 2 human immortals of Jin Dan, who were busy announcing the death penalty for Wu Qi, were so scared that their clothes were soaked in cold sweat. 6 demon bears who had formed their demon cores, and all of them were at least in the middle stage of Jin Dan, which meant that their cultivation was more than 10 times higher than theirs. Oh my god, 6 demon immortals. Moreover, they were demon bears, which were the most famous among the demon immortals for their violence. The 2 human immortals of Jin Dan screamed miserably. Like headless flies, they stepped on their sword beams and fled. They no longer had the temperament of immortals that they had a moment ago. But, where could they run? 6 huge bears leaped at them from all directions. 12 huge bear paws slapped down, bringing with them a green wind, and slapped the 2 sword beams to the ground. After that, the 6 bears pounced on the 2 human immortals of Jin Dan, who were lying on the ground and coughing out blood. Then, they raised their feet and gave them a series of violent stomps. Bang! 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 The ground was shaking violently. Blood kept bursting out from the 7 apertures of the 2 human immortals of Jin Dan. Soon, all their muscles and bones were broken, and they could only exhale but not inhale. Wu Qi panicked. These 2 human immortals of Jin Dan were of great use to him. Hastily, he rushed down and gave a few kicks on the buttocks of the 6 demon bears, driving them far away. After that, Wu Qi leaped beside the 2 human immortals of Jin Dan, pressed both hands tightly on their dantian, and cried out sternly, "You can't die. You can't die. Wake up. Wake up. Who is your master? Who is your master? Tell me. Tell me." Suddenly, a deafening battle cry rang out from all directions. A large group of elite soldiers, clad in blood-red battle skirts and cloaks, and their armors were also as red as blood, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. They formed into a battle formation and charged towards the girl in white and the 3,000 private soldiers. For a moment, the sound of the battle resounded through the sky. Chapter 140. The surface of the myriad red river was still as green as before, and the red leaves and flowers were still flowing down the river with a fierce passion. Today, not even a single pleasure boat could be seen in the myriad red river. The patrol boats of Great Yen Dynasty's navy were patrolling back and forth on the surface of the river, completely sealing it off. A wooden platform was built in the middle of the river, made from rare and precious wood. It measured nearly 100 acres in circumference, and a few pavilions and verandas were built on top of it. The platform was even paved with soil, and many rare and precious flowers were planted on top of it. A few thousand young men were clad in white robes and had a tall hat made of goose feathers on their heads. They sat solemnly on the wooden platform, listening to a young girl who was kneeling on a mat in the middle of the platform, reading a book of poems. The voice of the young girl was calm and cold, without any ups and downs. It was just like the surface of the myriad red river under the wooden platform, a clear and chilling green color. She was also clad in a white robe, and a tall hat made of goose feathers was placed on her head. As she looked around, a strong air of elegance and elegance of a scholar could be sensed. She had an ordinary appearance, and in this world where beautiful women could be found everywhere, it could only be considered as an inferior appearance. However, because of her temperament that was completely different from all the young men around her, it made her look like a swan that stood high up in the sky, while all the men around her looked like a toad. Even those pretty serving ladies who were quietly shuttling back and forth among the crowd, pouring tea for the people, when compared to this young girl, they were like sparrows that had just seen a phoenix, completely losing their color. Although she was not a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city or a state, but the so-called peerless beauty and grace were probably referring to someone like her. A long green thread was tied to the corner of the table in front of the young girl, and at the other end of the thread was a kite shaped like a fan. On the surface of the kite made from white paper, a few baby swallows were drawn with faint ink, flying around a willow branch. Although they were just a few insignificant strokes, they vividly portrayed the vitality of the baby swallows, as if a few real swallows made of flesh and blood were spreading their wings on the kite. Suddenly, the young girl put down the book of poems in her hand, picked up a jade paperweight, and lightly slapped it on the table in front of her. Followed by a loud and clear popping noise, the thousands of young men on the wooden platform all lowered their heads and listened carefully to the girl. The astonishingly bright eyes of the young girl swept a glance at the crowd of young men. Then, she nodded and said slowly, "Young Master Yuhen's Journey of an Immortal has a splendid atmosphere, and the lyrics are gorgeous. It really has the elegant and otherworldly aura of an immortal in the fairyland. It has a dignified and magnificent appearance. It's just that Qianqian has a question, would young Master Yuhen be able to answer it?" In the front of the crowd, a handsome young man with an imposing figure stood up. He cupped his fists and bowed deeply to the young girl. He said with a smile, "Miss Qianqian, please give me some pointers." Above the young man's head, there were drops of rain dripping down, drifting along with the wind. These extremely bright and thin raindrops drifted several miles away with the wind and landed lightly on the ground, immediately leaving extremely thin, long, and deep sword marks on the surface of the river. This young man was Jin Dan, a human immortal. The young girl smiled, looked at the young man and asked in a gentle tone, "Young Master Yuhen, you've never seen a real immortal. So, how do you know that the heavenly palace of an immortal must be as magnificent as the emperor of the mortal world? Perhaps, the residence of an immortal is just the same as the ordinary people in Great Yen Dynasty, with mud walls and roof tiles, or simply made of wood and grass." The young man was struck dumb. He stared at the young girl and couldn't say anything for a long while. He bowed his head and pondered for a while, then cupped his fist again, bowed deeply and said, "Miss Qianqian, you're right. I, Shangguan Yuhen, have overestimated my own strength, and recklessly speculated about the magnificent view of an immortal. Well, the legendary immortals living free and unfettered beyond the mortal world would never behave like the ordinary people, living in those magnificent and luxurious skyscrapers." Shangguan Yuhen breathed out a long sigh, then walked slowly and came before the young girl's table. He picked up the book of poems and casually threw it high up into the sky. Countless raindrops came rolling down from the sky, shredding the book of poems into pieces. Shangguan Yuhen breathed out a long sigh and said, "Hey, Yuhen, have spent 3 years studying, but all I got is a piece of paper filled with absurdity. I'm ashamed of myself." After mocking himself for a few times, Shangguan Yuhen bowed deeply to the girl again, then slowly retreated back to his seat and sat down on his knees. The young girl smiled faintly. She looked at Shangguan Yuhen, nodded slowly and said, "Young Master Yuhen, you can never belittle yourself. Compared to 3 years ago, young Master's skill in writing has improved greatly. You're able to cultivate the Tao of sword and the Tao of poetry at the same time. You're truly an extraordinary young master." Upon hearing the young girl's comment, Shengguan Yuhan's pale face immediately shone with a bright glow, and even his back straightened up. The young girl chuckled, then cried out, "Which young master has written a great poem? Please present it to me." If there are no more poetry books for Qianqian to comment on, Qianqian will ask for a new topic today, allowing all of you to show off your literary talent on the spot. The young girl glanced at all the young men around her, chuckled and said, "It's the same as the previous years. If any young master can win the competition with a poem, he or she can travel with Qianqian for 3 days after the competition is over." The young girl's cultivation base was not low. Although she did not put too much force into her shout, it still spread out to a distance of tens of miles away. All the sailors on the sentry boats could hear it clearly, and unconsciously, they all turned to look at the wooden platform. Naturally, Princess Xianglu, who was riding a ferry and rushing to the wooden platform in the middle of the river, heard the young girls shout as well. Pfft! Princess Xianglu chuckled, shook her head and said mockingly, "This old woman is already in her 20s, yet she still can't get married. She's playing the same trick again." 3 days of traveling with her, Yu Qianqian, is that considered a good fortune? Over the years, many men have traveled with her. Why don't I see her choosing one of them and marrying him off? Tuoba Haofeng, who was standing gingerly behind Princess Xianglu, dared not to say a word. He just kept glancing at Princess Xiangli's body, and only lowered his head carefully, his eyes still lingering on the hem of Princess Xiangli's dress. Princess Xianglu snorted coldly, then suddenly smiled sweetly and said with a sweet voice, "Is that Sister Yu Qianqian? Why didn't you inform Zi Xian about the competition when it has been held for 2 days? Sister Yu, aren't you bullying me? Zi Xian won't let you off easily. This time, I must punish you by drinking 3 cups of fine wine to your heart's content. I've even brought the wine cup with me." With a flip of her jade-like palm, Princess Xianglu, with a belly full of evil intentions, took out a purple gold rice dipper from her storage ring, which was twice the size of the white jade wine dipper used by Jing Ku. She happily placed it on her palm and showed it to Wu Qi. Sitting in the middle of the wooden platform, Yu Qianqian's expression flickered slightly. She stared at the purple gold rice cup in Princess Zhongli's palm, and her face turned extremely unsightly. But soon, Yu Qianqian adjusted her expression. She rose to her feet slowly, then said in a low voice with a cold face, "Qianqian welcomes the arrival of Princess. The important task of inviting Princess is given to young Master Tuoba. Why did he still invite Princess here today? You can't blame Qianqian for this. If you want to blame someone, blame it on young Master Tuoba. Since I don't have the courage to taste the 3 cups of fine wine, why don't I ask young Master Tuoba to do it for me?" Tuoba Haofeng's face turned blue. Was the punishment wine served by Princess Xianglu really tasty? Without batting an eyelid, he took a few steps back. When he raised his head up, his face was filled with a bright smile. He did not answer Yu Qianqian's question, but kept cupping his fist and greeting all the young men on the wooden platform. Among the several thousand young men on the wooden platform, about 1/3 of them rose to their feet and bowed deeply to Princess Xianglu, addressing her as Princess. On the other hand, the other 2/3 of the young men were kneeling on the ground, deeply touching their foreheads on the carpet and bowing deeply to Princess Xianglu. These young men who only cupped their fists and bowed to Princess Xianglu were the sons of influential and wealthy clans. They had a special privilege, as they did not have to kneel and bow to the princess in an informal setting. On the other hand, the rest of the young men were scholars who came from the common folk of Ji City. They were talented and learned, but they did not have any power or influence. Therefore, they had to bow to the princess like how a subject would greet a monarch. Princess Xianglu threw a proud glance at these young men who bowed down to her. She snorted coldly and said, "Get up, all of you. This is young Miss Qianqian's gathering of poetry and painting. There's no need to be overly courteous." After all the young men rose to their feet, only then did Princess Xianglu float up into the air, crossing over 1,000 feet of water and landing lightly on the wooden platform. 8 ghost immortals carried by Zhu are up, summoned a chilly breeze and brought all the palace guards who were on the same ship to the platform. Tuoba Haofeng shook his head slightly. He sprung up, tapped his feet on the surface of the water a few times, and carefully stepped onto the wooden platform. When Princess Zhanglu stepped onto the wooden platform, Yu Qianqian quickly came up to her. Although there was still a distance of 70 to 80 feet between them, both of them stretched out their arms and greeted each other. Princess Zhanglu gave a loud laugh and said, "Sister Yu, this is Zi Xian's 5th time participating in your gathering of poetry and painting. I think this gathering of yours has been held for the 13th time, right?" Yu Qianqian's expression flickered. When she was 14 years old, her name had shaken Ji City with a painting and a poem. Her fame had quickly overshadowed her father and grandfather, who were the chief editors of Great Yan Dynasty. Her reputation as a talented girl had spread across the world. However, when Princess Zhanglu pointed out that this gathering of poetry and painting had been held for the 13th time, she was mocking her for not getting married at the age of 27. Clenching her teeth tightly, Yu Qianqian chuckled and said, "That's right. Time flies, and if I'm not careful enough, I'll grow old. But, I do want to congratulate Your Highness, Jean Dan, for you have attained the body of a human immortal. With such a youthful appearance, I suppose you'll still be young and beautiful in the next few hundred years. At that point of time, I'm sure there will be countless young men who will bow down to you." Princess Zhanglu was mocking Yu Qianqian for not getting married at the age of 27, while Yu Qianqian did not show any weakness and prayed that Princess Zhanglu would not get married even after several hundred years. Both of them had a very intimate expression and attitude, like they were the best of friends, but their words were filled with the smell of gunpowder. Amidst the laughter, Princess Zhanglu and Yu Qianqian hugged each other tightly. Princess Zhanglu put her little mouth next to Yu Qianqian's ear, sneered, and said, "What kind of trick did Sister Yu come up with today to confuse people?" Yu Qianqian whispered into Princess Zhanglu's ear, giggled and said, "My little princess, aren't you worried that Sister Yu will steal all the young men around you?" "Hee, I heard that young Master Tuoba has been having a very close relationship with Princess for the past 2 years. If Sister Yu can make young Master Tuoba become my sister's admirer in just a few moves, will my little princess get angry again?" Princess Zhanglu twitched her little mouth, sneered indifferently and said, "You can steal whoever you want. That rascal Tuoba Haofeng, why would I put him in my eyes? Why don't I beg my father to issue an imperial decree, betrothing Sister Yu to Tuoba Haofeng?" Yu Qianqian's expression changed. After that, she quickly took a few steps back, chuckled and said, "Young masters, it is our good fortune to have Princess Zhanglu here today. Princess Zhanglu not only has an outstanding cultivation base, she is also a famous talented girl in Great Yan Dynasty. Her ink painting of birds and beasts is the best under the heaven. Why don't we let Princess Zhanglu paint a painting for us on the spot?" Princess Zhanglu's expression changed instantly, while Yu Qianqian narrowed her eyes and smiled. Chapter 141. Coughing lightly, Wu Qi cried out loudly, "Princess, Wu Qi is here." Bai Zhuer stuck out her chest, gnashed her teeth and said, "Isn't that right?" Not only did she steal Princess Limelight, she even came up with ways to embarrass Princess in every poetry and painting party. A vicious woman like her, if I don't teach her a good lesson, what will happen to us? Marquis Wu, you have a great ability. This time, you must help our princess to vent her resentment. Wu Qi cupped his fist at Ma Yi. Curiously, he looked at Ma Yi, whose body was shrouded in surging blood and energy, and whose pure yang energy was at least 100 times stronger than an ordinary man. He could not understand why a castrated eunuch like Ma Yi, who was cultivating with a pure yang cultivation technique, was not afraid of being burned alive by the internal flame. But, the strange thing was, not only was Ma Yi cultivating with a pure yang cultivation technique, he had also formed the Jin Dan smoothly. This was simply unimaginable. So, this is the grudge between Princess and Yu Qianqian? Wu Qi stared blankly at Bai Zhuer, who poked her head out from the window, and could not react for a long while. The sound of footsteps rang out, as Ma-yi, clad in a blood-red official outfit, with a large blade hanging from his waist, came striding over, escorted by a group of 100 fearsome soldiers. On his purple-red face, Ma-yi's deep eyes narrowed into a thin line, gleaming with a dangerous and ferocious gleam as he kept glancing at those private soldiers who were captured alive. Right after he stepped onto the wooden platform, Wu Qi saw Princess Xianglu sitting behind a long narrow table in the middle of the room. Her face was green, then red, then green, then green. Obviously, she was extremely embarrassed. A young girl, clad in a white robe and wearing a white goose feather crown on her head, was standing right next to Princess Xianglu with her hands clasped behind her back. She was whispering something to Princess Xianglu, causing her expression to become more and more unsightly. The armors worn by these blood-armored soldiers, as well as the weapons they used, were all middle-grade and lower-grade magical items. An eerie cold air and a baleful aura that could make one's hair stand on end surrounded their bodies, making these blood armor warriors appear exceptionally austere and terrifying. They were tidying up the battlefield in an orderly manner, collecting the corpses of the dead soldiers and arranging them neatly. Some young men in cyan clothes, whose eyes shone with a shrewd light, were trying to identify the faces of these corpses. The eyes of the Xiongqing brothers narrowed into a thin line. They hurriedly nodded and bowed to thank Wu Qi. At this time, they no longer had any dignity as demon immortals. They were clearly a group of lechers who could not wait to go to the bear den and pamper the female bears they had just captured from the forest. For a long time, Wu Qi could not figure out what was going on. He hastily asked Bai Zhu'er who Yu Qianqian was, what was the grudge between her and Princess Xianglu, and what was wrong with her poetry and painting party. Clearing his throat, Wu Qi turned to Ma-yi, smiled and said, Deputy Ma, I'll leave the matters here to you. If not because Deputy Ma had promised to send out an army to help, Wu Qi would not have the courage to step out from the city gate of Ji City for the past few days. You can't let go of these audacious rebels and traitors. If Princess Xianglu really knew the art of cursing, she would have long cursed Yu Qianqian to have her face filled with pockmarks, and to be unable to get married for the rest of her life. Bai Zhu'er was very eloquent, and she quickly told Wu Qi everything she knew. As demon immortals, Xiongqing brothers had very sensitive ears. They heard Ma Yi's mumbling, and were immediately frightened out of their wits. They hastily covered their nether regions with their hands and chased after Wu Qi. In just a blink of an eye, they had run several thousand feet away, and could no longer be seen. Wu Qi shook his head, rose to his feet, and said to Xiongqing brothers, who were standing behind him with a flattering smile on their faces, that's right. Tonight, you can go to the bear nest in the beast park and have a good time. Don't worry, I'll send someone to lead the way for you. No one will dare to stop you. Ma Yi grinned, patted heavily on Wu Qi's shoulder, and said indifferently, just leave this place to us. Marquis Tianyun can set his mind at ease and return to the city. His Majesty has made up his mind to get to the bottom of this matter, as well as the assassination of Duke Buji. No matter who is the one behind this, none of them will be able to escape. Shaking his head and sighing along the way, Wu Qi and his company finally arrived at the bank of Myriad Red River. Two Jin Dan human immortals could sense the bizarre transformation in their bodies. They were frightened out of their wits, and opened their mouths, wanting to scream out loud. The sword of greedy wolf pierced through their dantian in a blink of an eye, piercing through their Jin Dan and devouring all their spirit, energy, and soul. Ma Yi did not know whether to laugh or cry when he saw the actions of Xiongqing and his brothers. He glared angrily at the backs of Xiongqing and his brothers, then stroked his chin thoughtfully and said, recently, there is a shortage of manpower in the imperial palace. Should I kill these few lecherous bears one day and bring them into the imperial palace as eunuchs? TSK, a few of them can be used to brew some wine for His Majesty to nourish his body. For so many years, apart from those unlucky fellows who had their entire clan wiped out overnight by some natural or man-made calamity, all the other clans who married a daughter of Yu clan would achieve a meteoric rise in power within a few decades. Some of them would hold a high position in the imperial court, and some of them would become wealthy merchants who could rival a country in the field of commerce. There had never been an exception. Therefore, the daughter of Yu clan was an extremely sought-after resource in Great Yen Dynasty, 100 times more sought after than the princess of Great Yen Dynasty. Such an outstanding and eye-catching young girl was simply the natural rival of Princess Xianglu. There was no need for any reason. Ever since Princess Xianglu became sensible, she and Yu Qianqian did not see eye to eye. Due to the noble status of Yu clan in Great Yen Dynasty, and the lofty status of Yu clan in the hearts of those scholars in Great Yen Dynasty, Princess Xianglu and Yu Qianqian always addressed each other as sisters in front of the public. Behind their backs, Princess Xianglu had pricked countless paper puppets with Yu Qianqian's name on them with needles. Wu Qi rode the single-horned deer all the way to the city gate of Ji City. He was pondering who was the mastermind behind this assassination attempt, and who could mobilize a private army consisting of 2 Jin Dan human immortals, 32 Xiantian warriors, and 3,000 peak stage Hotian warriors to assassinate him. And who could make Yan Jiuhui and Lu Qingfeng stay in Ji City with a reasonable excuse? If not for the fact that he had prepared some precautions beforehand, laying down a trap half a month in advance, he would have been in deep trouble this time. While he was pondering over all sorts of strange thoughts, Bai Zhu'er brought a group of palace guards and rushed out from the room which was originally used as a resting place for the city guards. Excitedly, she grabbed Wu Qi's sleeves. Bai Zhu'er, who had a round face and looked adorable, grabbed Wu Qi's arm tightly and cried out, "Marquis Tianyun, our princess has gone to the poetry and painting competition held by young Miss Yu Qianqian. Princess wants us to bring you to the myriad Red River to look for her. Let's go, let's go. That Yu Qianqian has never been on good terms with Princess. With your glib tongue, I'm sure you can drive that Yu Qianqian to death, can't you? The men of Central Wind Guards are all fools." Relying on his height, Ma Yi looked down at Wu Qi and said with a deep voice, "A private army consisting of 3,000 peak stage Hotian warriors, and yet, Central Wind Guards never heard anything about it. If not because they gathered together to assassinate Marquis Tianyun, who could imagine that there is such a private army hiding right under His Majesty's feet in Ji City?" Currently, in Yu clan, Yu Qianqian was the only girl who was not married. Therefore, she had attracted the attention of many influential members of Great Yen Dynasty, hoping that they could marry this girl, who had a literary talent that surpassed all the men under the heaven, and possessed an amazing skill in trickery. Ma Yi's eyes shone with a ferocious gleam as he gazed at those green-clothed men who were trying to identify the faces of the corpses. He sneered and said, "Don't worry, this time, it is the High Minister's Swallow and the Blood Swallow Army personally commanded by me. We will bypass the Criminal and Justice Court and Scouting Office, and I guarantee that we will dig out the ancestral graves of these people." After the Jin Dan was formed in his water meridians, Wu Qi's absorption rate of the blood and energy essence of the cultivators had suddenly increased to 30%. 30% of the energy essence of 2 Jin Dan human immortals was absorbed into his body, and was carefully stored in the meridians in both his arms. Both Jin Dan human immortals were cultivating with fire element cultivation technique. The fire element spirit root that originated from their hearts had spread to their lungs and spleen, and half of their bodies had turned into a fiery red color. Amidst the crowd, Shengguan Yuhan suddenly turned his head and looked at Wu Qi. His gaze was as sharp as a sword, and a sword intent that felt like it was about to pierce through Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi did not waste any more time. He cupped his fist and bowed to Ma Yi. After that, he whistled and summoned the single-horned deer, riding it back to Ji City. Xiong Qing and his brothers greeted Ma Yi lazily, then proudly shrugged their hips and made an action that all male creatures would understand. After that, they giggled and transformed back to their human forms, following behind Wu Qi and left the scene in high spirits. Ma Yi laughed hideously, then said with a low, muffled voice, "Marquis Tianyun, just pretend that you know nothing about what happened here. Let's return to the city now." Ma Yi sneered, lowered his voice and warned, "Duke Yan Lu and the chief supervisor of West Wind Guards are caught by someone today. If not because Marquis Tianyun has already been taken care of by His Majesty, the Chief General, and the High Prime Minister, secretly mobilizing the Swallow Army and Blood Swallow Army, Marquis Tianyun would be alone and helpless today. The Yu clan, where Yu Qianqian came from, was a famous noble clan in Great Yen Dynasty. For nearly 1,500 years, Yu clan had always been famous under the heaven for their calligraphy and painting. Every generation of clan leader of Yu clan had served as the chief editor of Great Yen Dynasty, responsible for the collection and compilation of all kinds of history books. Yu clan did not have a large population. Although it had been passed down for several dozens of generations, the population of Yu clan was less than 100 at its peak. A ferry had been waiting for them for a long time, and very soon, it brought Wu Qi to the luxurious wooden platform in the middle of the river. However, no matter it was a male or female member of this clan, all of them were born with a graceful and elegant style of writing, and they were born talented scholars who could recite poems and paint. On top of that, it was a miraculous cultivation technique that was passed down from generation to generation in Yu clan. As a result, all the cultivators of Yu clan, regardless of whether they were men or women, had extraordinary intelligence and were full of tricks. In Great Yen Dynasty, no matter it was the influential nobles, the wealthy merchants, or the ordinary local tyrants, they all regarded it as the luckiest thing to woo a girl from Yu clan and marry into their clan. Forcefully pulling on Wu Qi's reins, Bai Zhuer dragged the single-horned deer and rushed towards the myriad red river. In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound. Wu Qi exerted all his strength, exerted the strongest force he had now, and stole a tiny thread of innate energy from both of them, using it to replenish his heart and innate nascent embryo. Suddenly, the energy in his heart skyrocketed. With every beat of his heart, more blood would flow into his body, and the energy contained in the blood flowing out from his heart would grow stronger as well. He could also sense that his 5 feet tall innate nascent embryo had slightly expanded, growing taller by 1 centimeter. Very soon, the battle cries stopped. 6,000 elite soldiers clad in blood-red armors and battle skirts, their bodies completely red like blood, had wiped out the private army of 3,000 soldiers led by the girl in white in just a blink of an eye. Only the girl in white and a couple dozens of leaders of the private army were left alive. Each of these 6,000 blood-red soldiers had the cultivation base of respiration tier of Xiantian realm. 6,000 warriors of Xiantian realm were strictly trained using the military drill. Without a doubt, the combative strength of an army like this was extremely frightening. Wu Qi took a deep breath and shook his head helplessly. He put on a pitiful expression and turned to look at Ma Yi. "I'll try my best." Wu Qi laughed dryly and helplessly. How was Wu Qi going to deal with a girl with such spirit of writing? Give her a brutal beating? That was just ridiculous. Speaking of which, some of the unspoken rules of Great Yen Dynasty were really troublesome. Wasn't it easy for a princess to deal with the daughter of a minister? Why did she have to play such petty tricks? Chapter 142. Princess Xianglu, who was sitting behind the table with a frown on her face, was immediately overjoyed. Her wrinkled little face smoothed out, and her pair of slender eyebrows arched up. She waved her hand at Wu Qi and said with a smile, "Wu Qi, come here." "Greetings, Sister Yu Qianqian, the most famous and talented girl of Great Yen Dynasty." Yu Qianqian smiled, tilted her head slightly, clasped her hands behind her back and stared at Wu Qi. Wearing a frivolous smile on his face, Wu Qi walked through a large group of young men clad in white robes, waving his hand at Yu Qianqian and said, "Young Miss Yu Qianqian, I've long heard of your great name." To be honest, Wu Qi had retracted his innate energy, and as he walked with flimsy steps, he looked even worse than an ordinary man. The impression he gave to the others was that his body was always moving up and down in a strange manner, and he did not look decent at all. It was very inconsistent with the elegant and romantic appearance of this place that was filled with distinguished guests. There was never a lack of hotheads among these young men, and there was no lack of men with ulterior motives who were willing to show off in front of Yu Qianqian, so as to deepen their impression in her heart. Immediately, over 30 young men, each clad in the same white robe and with an expensive jade pendant hanging on their waist, rose to their feet. They pointed their fingers at Wu Qi and shouted, "Who are you? Why didn't you take a bath and change your clothes before coming here? What kind of place is this? How can you be so rude?" Wu Qi halted his steps in surprise. He looked around at those young men clad in white robes and tall crowns, who were dressed in a serious manner. Then, he looked at his own green robe, which was messy and stained with grass due to all the running and fighting. He could not help but sneer and say, "Take a bath and change my clothes? What kind of place is this? Does Lord Wu Qi need to take a bath and change his clothes before coming here?" When the word "Lord" came out from his mouth, the few thousand young men on the wooden platform, Chi-Chi, immediately burst into a loud laughter. Everyone put on an expression of not daring to get close to him, and looked at Wu Qi with disgust and pride. One of the young men who stood up just now shook his head and said, "What a disgrace, what a disgrace. This is a place where we gather to evaluate poetry, calligraphy, and painting. How can we allow this kind of bumpkin to sully this place?" Princess Zhongli's face instantly darkened. She stared at the young man and murmured in a low voice, "Marquis Qingyang's grandson? If this empress doesn't think of a way to abolish your right of inheritance, then this empress isn't called Zi Xian. How can I remove your right to inherit the position of Qingyang Marquis? Might as well punish Marquis Qingyang as well. But, what crime should he be charged with?" While Princess Zhonglu was pondering in a low voice about how she was going to deal with these young men who dared to disrespect Wu Qi, Yu Qianqian, who was standing right next to her, heard Princess Zhonglu talking to herself. Yu Qianqian frowned. She stretched out her hand and pressed on the air, then shouted with a clear voice, "Everyone, silence." When Yu Qianqian opened her mouth, all the young men present on the scene immediately shut their mouths. Then, they sat up straight in their seats with a solemn expression, putting on the most gentle, elegant, and handsome look, looking at Yu Qianqian lovingly. Yu Qianqian smiled faintly and gave Princess Zhonglu a satisfied look. Princess Zhongli's expression turned unsightly immediately. In the minds of these young men, the status of Princess Zhonglu was obviously lower than Yu Qianqian. This made Princess Zhonglu feel very uncomfortable. She stared fixedly at the huge drawing paper in front of her, with the corners of her little mouth curved upwards. With a complacent smile on her face, Yu Qianqian gave Wu Qi a few glances, and when she saw the few bloodstains on Wu Qi's clothes, her expression changed slightly. She gave all the young men present on the scene a glance of warning, then turned to Wu Qi and said with a gentle tone, "Marquis Tianyun, Wu Qi, Marquis Wu, I, Yu Qianqian, offer my greetings. This is the place where I gather my friends to appreciate poems, calligraphy, and paintings every year. Taking a bath and changing clothes is just a custom, so as not to tarnish the exquisite writings and paintings under the heaven." Yu Qianqian sighed lightly, then turned to Wu Qi and said with a smile, "This is a rule set by all of us, and we all abide by it. We don't mean to make things difficult for Marquis Wu." After staring fixedly at Yu Qianqian for a long while, Wu Qi suddenly burst out into a loud laughter. Intentionally or unintentionally, his laughter emanated the unique aura of a Xiantian realm warrior. The deafening laughter spread out in all directions, shaking the water of the myriad red river to the height of 1 foot, and rocking the wooden platform beneath his feet. If it were not for the iron anchors tying the wooden platform, it would have long been overturned by the waves. Preposterous. What a joke. Is it necessary to take a bath and change clothes before the exquisite writings and paintings can be displayed? This is the biggest joke since the creation of the world. Wu Qi gazed at Yu Qianqian disdainfully, sneered and said, "Must take a bath and change clothes before the exquisite writings and paintings can be displayed? Only when the exquisite writings and paintings can be displayed? This is simply neglecting the essentials and focusing on the trifles, an act that is as stupid as a pig. All of you are just putting on an act and know nothing but bullshit. How dare you talk about poems and paintings?" Stomping his feet forcefully, Wu Qi let out a long laugh and said, "If taking a bath and changing clothes can allow one to compose an exquisite poem and paint a beautiful painting, then those prostitutes in the brothels who have been raped by thousands of men, how many times do they need to take a bath in a day? Doesn't that make them the most famous talented girls in Great Yen Dynasty? They are at least 100 times more famous than you, big sister you." Yu Qianqian's expression turned extremely unsightly, and her eyeballs nearly popped out from her eye sockets. When had she ever seen such an unreasonable man like Wu Qi? Compared to these handsome, elegant and refined men who had a bellyful of knowledge and poems, Wu Qi was like a wild boar who had intruded into a vegetable field, trampling all the good cabbages in the vegetable field into a puddle of mud. On the other side, those young men, who were clad in white robes and wore a tall white hat with goose feathers on their heads, were like wild cats whose buttocks were set ablaze, or the filial sons and grandsons who had their ancestral graves dug out. Several thousand men were cursing and swearing at Wu Qi at the same time. They were cursing him for being absurd and outrageous, saying that he was the #1 arrogant villain under the heaven, a villager from the madman village who deserved to die the most. There were even some young masters from influential clans who possessed a little bit of cultivation in martial arts. They drew out their swords, fuming with rage, and wanted to have a life-and-death battle with Wu Qi. Wu Qi's words were too hurtful, a slap to their faces. What he said was a blatant humiliation to all the young masters of the literati on the scene. Raging bear roars echoed out, as 6 gigantic demon bears suddenly transformed back to their bear forms, riding on a demonic wind and flying up into the sky. 6 powerful soul pressures came crashing down from the sky, causing several thousand young men to fall to the ground while letting out miserable cries. Then, Xiong Qing roared out in a low, muffled voice, "Lao Tzu knows nothing about poems and paintings, and he doesn't know anything about all of you sour things. But, His Majesty has ordered me, your ancestor, to protect Wu Qi, and whoever dares to touch even a single hair of his, Lao Tzu will wipe out his entire clan." Xiong Qing's teeth clattered against each other, then he laughed out loud and said, "It's been a long time since I've tasted human flesh, and I've been missing it very much." The best way to deal with these self-righteous scholars was to place a sword or saber on their necks. Trembling with fear, several thousand hot-blooded scholars shut their mouths. Even Shangguan Yuhan, who cast a malicious glance at Wu Qi just now, had wisely shut his mouth as well. There were 6 demon bears with demon cores here, while he was alone. There was no way he could be a match for all 6 demon bears when they joined hands. Wu Qi smiled. He called out to Xiong Qing and his brothers and asked them to descend from the sky, then walked back to the ferry with heavy steps. With both hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi looked at Yu Qianqian, whose face had turned livid with rage. He smiled and said, "It seems like none of you agree with Wu Qi's opinion. He, you are indeed a group of hypocrites who know nothing but a bunch of self-proclaimed learned scholars. Big sister Yu, what is the topic of today's poetry and painting meeting? Tell us." Yu Qianqian's lips were trembling, and she could not say a word for a long time. On the other side, Princess Zhanglu was smiling so widely that her eyes were narrowed into 2 fine lines. She looked at Wu Qi smilingly, smiled tenderly and said, "Today, Big Sister Yu has just commented on Shangguan Yuhan, the youngest sect elder of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, his poem, The Journey of an Immortal. After that, Big Sister Yu said that we mortals can never guess the realm of immortals. Therefore, today's topic is to go against her Tao. Instead of writing about immortals, I'll write about the poems written by ordinary people." With a flicker in her eyes, Princess Zhanglu stared at Yu Qianqian and said with a cold voice, "Big Sister Yu also said that my drawing of birds and beasts is very good, and asked me to draw a drawing of galloping horses here. But, I've never seen that kind of inferior mount, so how could I draw a drawing of galloping horses?" Sneering, Wu Qi walked to the table in front of Princess Zhanglu and grabbed a thick stack of papers from it. These papers should be the poems written by these young men before Wu Qi came here, describing the life of ordinary people in the village. However, there were so many young men on the scene. Some of them came from influential families, and some were learned scholars from scholarly families. So, which one of them had really seen how ordinary people in the village lived? The poems they wrote were merely the same as those from the Book of Songs. The style was the same 4 or 5 words short sentences. Although they were elegant and graceful, they were nothing but words like chopping trees to the southern mountain and spinning yarn. How could there be anything new in them? Looking at Yu Qianqian, who had an unsightly expression on her face, Wu Qi suddenly burst out into a loud laughter. Poems written by ordinary people in the village. Look at what you have written here. Well, I'll let you, a bunch of toads who have never seen the world, see what is called a poem, what is called elegant and refined, and what is called the rustic taste of ordinary people. After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi took a few steps on the wooden platform, threw his head back and forth, and recited a long poem into the sky, date blossoms rustling down from the cloth, the sound of reeling carts echoing from the south and north of the village, the old willow selling vegetables and melons. Drowned in wine, the road is long and sleepy, the man thirsts for tea, knocking on the door and asking the house of savages. As he had never seen a cucumber in this world, and had no idea if it existed in this world, Wu Qi had changed the word cucumber to melon. His words had stirred the expressions of all the people on the scene. Some of the truly talented and knowledgeable scholars had their faces turned pale as they stared at Wu Qi as if they were looking at a ghost. Since he had plagiarized it, he would plagiarize it to the end. Wu Qi's face did not even blush. After pretending to take 7 steps forward, he recited again, the eaves of the thatched house are low and small, and the grass is green on the stream. Old voices are sweet in drunkenness, and whose family is white-haired. The eldest is weeding beans to the east of the stream, and the youngest is weaving a chicken coop. I love the rascals the most, and the head of the stream is peeling the lotus seed. The poem was as beautiful as a water chestnut that had just come out from the water, fresh and tender. When the poem was recited, which was completely different from the style of Great Yan dynasty, the entire scene fell into a dead silence. Even Xiong Qing and his brothers were struck dumb by the recital. Their 12 ears were twitching violently, and their eyeballs were nearly popping out from their eye sockets. Yu Qianqian's face was pale as she stared at Wu Qi. Her body was swaying, and she nearly fell to the ground. Yet, Wu Qi took another 3 steps forward and continued reciting, the bright moon startles the magpies on the other branches, the cool breeze chirps the cicadas in the middle of the night. The fragrance of the paddy fields announces a bountiful year, the croaking of the frogs is heard. 7 to 8 stars beyond the sky, 2 to 3 raindrops in front of the mountain. The old thatched-in society stands by the forest, the road turns into the stream bridge and suddenly sees it. Everyone was shocked, and no one dared to say a word. Among the several thousand scholars in the hall, more than half of them had secretly crushed the paper in front of them, then slowly hid it under their sleeves. Those who scolded Wu Qi the fiercest just now had their heads lowered in shame. Princess Zhanglu rested her chin on both of her hands and stared at Wu Qi with a silly smile on her face. Her eyes were filled with bright stars. Yet, Wu Qi refused to let it go. He let out a long laugh and said, "Today, Wu Qi didn't take a bath, nor did he change his clothes. Moreover, he had just killed several dozens of men and rushed here." Ha ha ha, the poem has been completed. Now, let's see what Wu Qi's strokes are like. Somebody, serve Lao Tzu's brush and ink. Princess Zhanglu sprung up from her seat and eagerly waited on Wu Qi as he sat behind the long table. Holding the brush and ink in his hand, Wu Qi began to paint on the paper. In just less than an hour, he had completed the painting of a galloping horse. Chapter 143. When it came to drawing horses, old Mr. Su Beihong's horses were undoubtedly the best. The underhand sect had obtained a lot of rare and precious items on earth, and old Mr. Su Beihong had quite a few paintings of galloping horses. Lu Xiaobai was an extremely cultured man. Every single day, she would copy the same painting over and over again. But in fact, in Wu Qi's eyes, he was just trying to make a counterfeit to deceive others. However, the painting of galloping horses that Lu Xiaobai had painstakingly cultivated for several years was vividly displayed by Wu Qi today, shocking everyone present. On the huge drawing paper that was 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, Wu Qi splashed ink with a brush that was as thick as an adult's arm. 7 galloping horses of different shapes and colors appeared vividly on the paper. The horses had strong muscles and bones, their eyes seemed to be glowing brightly, and there seemed to be energy bursting out from their nostrils as well. A vigorous life force came rushing out from their nostrils, as if they were about to leap out from the drawing paper. Using only ink of different shades, Wu Qi had drawn 7 fine horses that gave people a feeling of colorful colors. This technique could no longer be described as a technique, it was close to the Dao. With Jean Dan's extraordinary ability as a human immortal, he had imprinted a thread of divine sense into the 7 fine horses. That was why the drawing could move people's hearts and souls. When a few white-robed youths carefully propped up the painting of galloping horses with a pole and showed it to the several thousand people around them, they could not hold back their cries of surprise, which were as loud as a clap of thunder, causing the surrounding water to sway up and down. Some of the slightly older scholars were also knowledgeable. They stared blankly at the 7 fine horses on the drawing paper, and suddenly burst into tears. Then, they thumped their chests and stamped their feet, crying out loud. They had immersed themselves in the Tao of painting for decades, yet their attainments were actually not as good as Wu Qi, a young man who had not even reached his 20s. How could they accept this? Like a proud little peacock, Princess Zhanglu stood proudly right next to Wu Qi with arms akimbo, her delicate little chin tilted up complacently with her arms akimbo, and snorted a few times at Yu Qianqian, who had a pale face, in an extremely provocative manner. The style of the 3 poems was completely different from the popular poems of Great Yan Dynasty, but it was fresh and elegant. Together with this painting of galloping horses, Princess Zhanglu had gained a lot of face. In the past years, he was always humiliated by Yu Qianqian in every poetry and painting party. But, because of the grudge between them, he still had to show up in the poetry and painting party every year. He couldn't possibly show his weakness and admit defeat to Yu Qianqian. Fortunately, they had Wu Qi this year. They had regained the face they had lost in the past. Complacently, Princess Zhanglu twisted her tiny waist and flung her huge skirt into a big green flower. Then, she smiled complacently and said, "Who else wants to compete with Marquis Tianyun in painting and poetry? I'll offer a reward here. Whoever can win against Marquis Tianyun, I'll let him accompany me on an outing for 3 days." He. When she spoke of her proud words, Princess Zhanglu couldn't help but laugh out loud. However, she was too excited. Her laughter suddenly burst out from her throat. It was a very sharp and sonorous laugh, which startled even herself. The 5-colored divine rays stretched out slowly behind Princess Zhongli's back. As she was in a great mood, the 5 colors of the divine rays behind Princess Zhongli's back had become distinct today. They shot out from her back like 5 long rainbows, shooting straight up to a height of 1,000 feet. The surrounding river water had become as flat as a mirror. However, underneath the smooth surface of the water, which was as smooth as egg white, were countless tiny whirlpools the size of a human palm. It was exactly what Princess Zhanglu was feeling right now. Yu Qianqian's expression kept changing as she stared at the majestic painting of galloping horses. After a long while, she forced out a smile, turned to Wu Qi and said, "Marquis Wu is indeed a generous artist. This painting of galloping horses is indeed bold and unconstrained, but it's not very exquisite." The 5-colored divine rays behind Princess Zhanglu retracted and abruptly transformed into a clump of 5-colored chaos. She looked like a little hen whose feathers were plucked by someone, and was about to step forward and argue with Yu Qianqian in a threatening manner. "Not exquisite enough. Not exquisite enough. The theme you gave is a painting of galloping horses, not a painting of fleas." Wu Qi pulled Princess Zhanglu back, stared at Yu Qianqian, who had her eyes sparkling, and said with a faint smile, "Not exquisite enough?" "That's right, this horse is so bold and vigorous. Only men like us, who kill and burn, can appreciate it." Miss Yu Qianqian, a pampered young lady who grew up in a flower garden, would never understand the heroic sentiment. "Fine, if you want an exquisite one, Wu Qi has it here as well." After letting out a few loud laughs, he asked the serving ladies on the wooden platform to lay out a fine white brocade. After that, Wu Qi asked for a set of tiny brushes and various colors of paints, mixing the colors himself. After that, he picked up the tiny brushes and began to paint on the brocade. If he wanted an exquisite painting, a luxurious painting, and a painting that Yu Qianqian could not find any flaws in, there was no other choice but Emperor Huizong's painting of rare birds. Just like old Mr. Su's painting of galloping horses, the underhand sect had a few of Emperor Huizong's paintings of rare birds, and Lu Xiaobai had copied them thousands of times. Thus, almost all the strokes and strokes had become her instinct. Wu Qi did exactly the same thing. With Jean Dan's excellent control over his fleshly body, like a laser photocopier, he managed to copy a painting of rare birds in just 1 hour. A golden pheasant with gorgeous feathers and a lively expression was standing on the branch of a flowering tree. The whole painting was neat and meticulous, with gorgeous colors and a strong air of nobility. When a few white-robed youths hung up the picture of the rare bird with a pole, the wooden platform once again emitted a landslide-like exclamation. Some people even staggered forward, wishing that they could drill their bodies into the picture. Several thousand men surged forward, and the order on the wooden platform was immediately thrown into chaos. Princess Xianglu glared at them and unleashed a 5-colored divine ray behind her back, unleashing a tremendous force that pushed back those white-robed young men. Then, she snapped sternly, "What's the rush? What's the rush? This painting belongs to me. Who dares to damage it or make it wrinkle?" "Humph." Then, she pointed her finger at the river. A bolt of lightning as thick as a bowl smashed onto the surface of the river with a deafening rumble, creating a large pit several hundred feet in circumference on the surface of the river, while waves rose several hundred feet high. After that, no one dared to move recklessly on the wooden platform. Everyone held their breath, staring quietly at the 2 paintings in front of them. Some of them even kept repeating the 3 poems written by Wu Qi over and over again in a low voice. No matter it was the poems or the paintings, Wu Qi had struck them so hard that they could not even speak a single word. Yu Qianqian stared blankly at the 2 paintings with completely different styles. Her face flushed, then turned pale, then turned green, and her body kept shivering. For a long time, she could not speak a single word. Only after a full quarter of an hour did Yu Qianqian finally turn her head around and stared blankly at Wu Qi. Wu Qi waved his hand hastily and said, "Big sister Yu, please don't ask me about any books or anything like that. Wu Qi is just a savage from the countryside. If you want me to recite a few crooked phrases and write a few lines about beasts, I can do it. But if you want me to tell you some articles about governing the country, or some books about managing the affairs of the world, Wu Qi really doesn't know how to do that." Cupping his fist, Wu Qi pulled the hand of Princess Xianglu, whose face was filled with a smile, and walked towards the ferry. If not for the sake of Princess Xiangli's face, Wu Qi would not be bothered to fool around with this group of fools, who had eaten too much and had nothing better to do, pretending to be cultured and elegant. Just now, he had drawn his sword and chopped several dozens of living men, and there was still a great amount of Jean Dan's human immortal essence in his meridians that had not been absorbed yet. So, he had the time to pretend to be a cultured and elegant man, and play around with this group of young masters who had nothing better to do all day long. Yu Qianqian was taken aback. She was about to stop Wu Qi, but Wu Qi had already blocked off all possible excuses for her to make things difficult for him. He had said it himself, he only knew a few crooked phrases and a few lines about beasts. Asking him to write an article about governing the country and managing the affairs of the world, he was just a savage from the countryside, and he would never know how to do that. First, he had shown his face, and then he had blocked off all possible excuses for making things difficult for her. What Wu Qi had done was a slap to her face. With a poem like that and a painting like that, he had claimed that he was just a savage from the countryside. Then, where did he put the several thousand scholars who belonged to the upper class of Great Yan dynasty? Clenching her teeth, Yu Qianqian stomped her feet and said, "Marquis Wu, may I know which grandmaster is your master?" Although Wu Qi had told her that he was just a savage from the countryside, Yu Qianqian would never believe it. She was determined to ask him about the inheritance of his poems and painting. She had lost all her face in front of Wu Qi today, and in the future, she would ask her father and grandfather to personally make a move, and make her regain her face from Wu Qi's master. Without even turning his head back, Wu Qi pulled Princess Zhanglu, who had her head held high, away from the wooden platform and stepped onto the ferry. He sneered and said, "Which grandmaster is your master?" "My master is a martial artist who only knows how to kill and burn. He was long killed by someone in Meng Mountains, so he can't be considered as a grandmaster." Meanwhile, Princess Zhanglu hastily gestured to Bai Zhuer and Bai Zuer, asking them to bring some men to roll up the two paintings and bring them back to the imperial palace. Wu Qi turned and gave Yu Qianqian a smile. He laughed and said, "I'm afraid elder sister Yu has no idea what kind of place Meng Mountains is. You can just go to scouting office and check it out. All the information about my background are in there, they are all there. Don't send me there, just go and check it out yourself." With a few steps, Yu Qianqian came to the side of the ferry. With a stern voice, she cried out, "Marquis Wu, why are you bullying me like this? With your foundation in poetry and painting, which martial artist can teach you? If a martial artist can teach a handsome man like Marquis Wu, doesn't that make us all a joke?" After a brief moment of pondering, Wu Qi looked at the many white-robed youths on the wooden platform, who were staring at him with a hopeful look in their eyes. He said, "Fine, I'll teach you a lesson today. You can't produce anything by working behind closed doors. This poetry is nothing but the comprehension of the human heart, and this painting is nothing but the projection of the heaven and earth. The mortal world is good for tempering the mind, and the boundless world is good for soothing the mind. If you want to compose a good poem, to paint a good painting, it is impossible to do it under the skirt of a girl. Imitate the heaven and earth. Just remember these 4 words." When these 4 words, "imitate the heaven and earth," came out, all the white-robed youths on the wooden platform, including Shengguan Yuhan, bowed to Wu Qi from afar. Only Yu Qianqian's face turned green like a melon. Wu Qi's words were like a dozen slaps on her face, making her heart and lungs tremble violently. She was too ashamed to face anyone. She glared at Wu Qi, gnashed her teeth and cried out in a low voice, "What a great Wu Qi! What a great Marquis Wu! Just because you have some talent, how dare you bully and humiliate others?" She glared fiercely at Princess Zhanglu, who seemed to be complacent now, and said with a gloomy voice, "What a great Princess Zhanglu! Do you really think you are so great just because you are a princess? Just you wait, I'll return the humiliation you gave me today by 10 times, no, 100 times." Bai Zhuer brought some men and packed up the paintings. Along the way, Wu Qi and his company began their journey back to Ji City with joyful laughter. When they were still tens of miles away from Ji City, they could already see a stretch of dark city wall stretching on the horizon. All of a sudden, a loud thunderclap rang out from the sky, as a blinding light suddenly burst out from the city wall. A huge light barrier enshrouded in countless runes enveloped the entire Ji City within. After that, they saw the city gate that was facing them explode. A group of people rushed out from the city, bringing with them a murderous aura that seemed to have come to a dead end. Countless battle cries rang out from all directions. Outside the city, Chi-Chi had lined up into 20 phalanxes, 20 companies of 10,000 soldiers from Blood Swallow Army. The 20 phalanxes spread out in all directions, then converged inwards, trapping the large group of people who had just rushed out from the city in a tight formation. Above Ji City, several hundred figures were seen shuttling back and forth. Countless sword beams, thunderbolts, talismans, and magical treasures were seen flying everywhere, causing the ground to shake violently. Wu Qi was struck dumb. Was this a rebellion or something else? Meanwhile, Princess Xianglu let out a shrill cry. With a five-colored divine ray behind her back, she flew straight into the city. Chapter 144. Wu Qi failed to grab hold of Princess Xianglu, and when he saw her bringing 8 ghost immortals and rushing towards Ji City, he dared not to hesitate. Without hesitation, he ordered Xiongqing and his brothers to follow closely behind her. Princess Xianglu possessed the cultivation base of Jin Dan realm, and with the protection of 14 Jin Dan realm experts, while Xiongqing and his brothers possessed the cultivation base of middle stage Jin Dan realm and above, there was absolutely no problem for them to be safe. But, what exactly was going on? Why did such a big mess suddenly occur? Looking at the thick light barrier hovering above Ji City, and the countless huge ruins within it, measuring several tens of feet in circumference, it was obvious that the last strategic defensive formation of Ji City had been activated. This formation was a two-way isolation formation. Once it was activated, not only the people outside the city couldn't get in, even the people inside the city couldn't get out. Unless one was a cultivator who had attained mastery in nascent divinity realm, there was no way he could break through this ultimate defensive formation of Ji City. Currently, the only weak point of Ji City was the city gate, which was destroyed by someone from inside the city the moment the light barrier rose. Currently, 200,000 soldiers of Blood Swallow Army had occupied an area of several tens of miles in circumference, guarding the city gate so tightly that not even a drop of water could pass through. The several tens of thousands of soldiers who came rushing out from the city were engaged in a fierce battle with them. Both armies were engaged in a fierce battle. Near the city gate, nearly 100 cultivators of Blood Swallow Army, each clad in a blood-red robe, were waving their swords and unleashing balls of thunder flame, trying to completely seal off the city gate. However, a group of old men clad in pale golden long robes were guarding near the city gate. They kept unleashing powerful talismans one after another, breaking the light barrier that was spreading from the city wall to the city gate. Streams of light kept extending from the surrounding city wall into the city gate. As long as these streams of light were linked together, the ultimate defensive formation of Ji City would be able to completely seal off the only gap on the city wall. However, those old men in golden robes were guarding in the city gate. While controlling their flying swords to fight against the cultivators of Blood Swallow Army outside the city, they kept unleashing specially made talismans to quickly break the streams of light that came rushing towards them. This gate was the only way for the besieged people to rush out of the city. All of a sudden, a loud boom rang out. Among the nearly 100 cultivators of Blood Swallow Army, nearly half of them pulled out a fist-sized, crimson thunder clapper, crafted using the flame of the crimson sun. After performing an incantation gesture and activating the incantation within the thunder clapper, they quickly threw the thunder clapper towards the golden-robed cultivator in the city gate. These thunder bombs were the secret magical items created by Mo sect of Great Yen Dynasty. Their shells were forged with steel forged with crimson sun flame. Once they exploded, they would release 3,600 1-foot-long needles that shot in all directions. The thunder fire in Lei Jinzi's body was forged by gathering a bit of pure yang evil flame from the earth's core and a bit of pure yang true fire from the 9 heavens high up in the sky. The power of the thunder fire was immense. Once it exploded, everything within a radius of 1,000 feet would be pulverized. Nearly 50 thunder bombs were thrown out at the same time, while all the cultivators of Blood Swallow Army retreated quickly on their flying swords. In the blink of an eye, nearly 100 sword beams shot out, piercing through the air and reaching a distance of several thousand feet away. On the other side, the golden-robed cultivators in the city gate had their faces turned pale. They let out a shrill laugh together and called back their sword beams. A couple dozens of sword beams formed a thick 5-colored light screen in the city gate, shielding them from the incoming attack. A loud boom rang out, as all the thunder bombs exploded at the same time. Inside the city gate, the city wall which had activated its defensive formation remained motionless, as all the power of the thunder bombs shot out through the city gate and spread to both sides. The couple dozens of golden-robed cultivators in the city gate were ripped to shreds, while their sword beams were shattered by the powerful flame thunder bombs. A column of flame, over 100 feet in diameter, shot out from the city gate at top speed. Caught off guard, the Blood Swallow army and another large troop of soldiers who were engaged in a fierce battle near the city gate were killed by the column of flame, killing several thousand of their men. The crimson flame swept out with a scorching temperature, scorching the ground 2 miles in circumference outside the city gate. The bodies of the soldiers from both sides were instantly turned into ashes, and even their armors were melted by the extremely hot flame thunder bombs. Those soldiers who rushed out from the city let out shrill howls. Upon witnessing this gruesome scene, many of them had a mental breakdown, and no longer had the courage to fight. The soldiers of Blood Swallow army had witnessed the death of their comrades as well, but none of them made a single sound. Like the most precise machine, they followed the formation that they had been practicing in the past and quickly filled up the gap left behind by their fallen comrades. Still, they lined up in formation and surrounded the enemy. The talismans that shot out from the top of the city wall burst into a blinding light, while countless bright halos began to rush toward the open city gate. In just a blink of an eye, there was only a small hole that was less than 2 feet wide left on the city gate. As long as this hole was blocked, G City would be completely sealed off, and no one would be able to rush out from the city. At that very moment, when the entire G City was about to be completely sealed off, a large golden-red umbrella rushed out from the city, shrouded in a towering flame. The umbrella had a circumference of several tens of feet, and 36 ribs of the umbrella were shooting out beams of light that were as sharp as blades, slicing and shattering the flame that rushed out from the defensive barrier on the city wall. Meanwhile, 12 fist-sized red pearls on top of the umbrella were shooting out a flame that was over 1,000 feet long. Amidst the flame, one could vaguely see hundreds of tiny green serpents, which kept shooting out tiny green thunderbolts and causing the defensive barrier on the city wall to shake violently. A burly man, who stood over 10 feet tall and clad in a golden armor, was holding the umbrella and standing firmly in the city gate. With a stern voice, he roared, "Somebody, escort the young miss out of the city. Quick, quick. All the defensive barriers have been activated, I can't hold on for long." Right after the burly man let out a few roars, a group of over 30 imperial eunuchs, each clad in the robe of a high-ranking eunuch, suddenly appeared on top of the city gate. Each of them was holding a 36 feet tall flagpole in their hands, and on top of it, a formation flag that measured approximately 10 feet in circumference was waving and waving rapidly, bringing up a bright whirlpool that looked like a raging whirlpool. Following the movement of these imperial eunuchs, a flame that reached 1,000 feet tall suddenly burst out from the top of the city wall. Within the flame, countless twisting runes were blinking and blinking rapidly. The power of the defensive formation of G City had been raised to another level. Originally, when the defensive formation of G City was activated, it was a dead formation, just like the formation in the Immortal's Cave of Swords stems from the mind. But now, when these imperial eunuchs were controlling the formation on each of the dozens of city walls, the defensive formation that covered the entire G City had become a living formation with incredible power. There was a huge difference between a dead formation and a living formation, and now, the power of the defensive formation of G City had increased by at least 10 times. Suddenly, the burly man in the city gate let out a miserable howl. His legs could no longer withstand the sudden increase of the pressure from the defensive formation, causing blood to burst out from his legs, and he fell to his knees. With a hoarse voice, he threw his head back and howled into the sky, "Go now. What are you waiting for? Quickly bring young miss away from here." Buzz the flame on the defensive formation on the city wall rose again, and several dozens of green thunderballs the size of a human head took shape inside the city gate. When these thunderballs appeared, they quickly attached themselves to the surface of the umbrella and exploded. A series of deafening booms rang out, and the tremendous shockwave caused all the soldiers of Blood Swallow army outside the city, as well as their opponents, to lose their balance and fall to the ground. 7 of the 12 pearls hanging on the umbrella exploded on the spot. A miserable howl rang out, as the arms of the burly man holding the umbrella were shattered by the tremendous force of the thunderballs. He coughed out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. A furious howl that sounded like a wounded ferocious beast was heard. The burly man threw his head back and howled into the sky, "Young miss, please tell Patriarch that I, your servant, have received a great kindness from Patriarch, and I have no way to repay him. Today, I will open up a path for young miss, allowing you to escape from G City. Tell Patriarch that when he saved your servant years ago, I swore to sacrifice myself to repay him. Today, your servant will fulfill my vow." Countless fireballs surged toward the center of the city wall. Just as they were about to join together and block off the city gate, the burly man suddenly widened his eyes. A golden light flashed near his dantian, and his body abruptly transformed into a clump of blood mist and sprayed out. The golden fireball swept across all directions, wiping away all the defensive formations in the city gate. Not only did Jean Dan's self-destruct exploded, the umbrella held in his hand had exploded as well. The remaining 5 pearls and 36 umbrella ribs exploded at the same time. The red flame mixed with the golden light emitted by Jean Dan's self-destruction nearly collapsed the city gate. Princess Xianglu, together with 8 ghost immortals and 6 Xiongqing brothers, had arrived at the city gate. Looking at the golden red fireball rushing toward them, Princess Xianglu let out a clear cry. The 5-colored divine ray behind her back began to roll and roll. With a wave of her hand, she unleashed several hundred tiny beams, which formed into a fine net in front of her and pulled away all the fireball. However, it was, after all, the destructive force caused by the self-explosion of a human immortal. Although Princess Xianglu possessed a magical cultivation technique, she was still forced back by the counterforce. As a result, she lost her balance and fell to the ground in a sorry state, rolling and rolling back several hundred feet on the scorching hot ground that had a layer of melted layer on it. 8 ghost immortals let out a shrill cry, shooting out grayish-white sword beams and firmly sealing off the city gate. At the same time, Xiongqing brothers transformed into their true forms of bear demons. They were wearing a set of blood-red armor that looked exactly the same as the standard armor of Blood Swallow army, but it was an upper-tier magical item. Wielding 6 huge wolf-tooth maces, they roared and leaped toward the city gate. The flames on the city wall were dimmed by the explosion of the burly man's Jean Dan, but in the blink of an eye, the flames on the city wall became even more intense. Countless light snakes quickly extended towards the city gate, and were about to seal the gate again. An ear-splitting noise of wind breaking was heard, as 6 flying swords, shrouded in purple thunderbolts, spun and dashed out from the city gate. Countless thunderbolts shot out from the swords, exploding and causing the defensive barrier near the city gate to flicker violently. 6 flying swords, whose shape could not be seen clearly, and could only be seen as a ball of green and white thunderbolts, had formed a small reverse formation inside the city gate, guarding the city gate firmly. No matter how the over 30 imperial eunuchs standing on top of the tower above the city gate performed incantation gestures and recited incantations, activating the defensive barrier on the city wall, the 6 flying swords remained motionless. 8 ghost immortals let out a shrill cry at the same time, shooting grayish-white sword beams towards the 6 flying swords with an immense ghostly aura. A mocking sneer was heard coming from within the city gate, "You're courting death. As ghosts, how dare you touch the 9th heaven's devil subduing true thunder? Aren't you courting death?" The flying swords collided with each other. Countless hair-thin purple thunderbolts shot out and shattered the 8 grayish-white sword beams, exploding them into countless grayish-white specks that looked like fireflies, drifting in all directions. In addition, several dozens of drifting thunderbolts shot out from the city gate and smashed onto the bodies of a few ghost immortals, causing green smoke to rise from their bodies and making them fall back while howling miserably. Thunderbolts were the command of the heaven and earth. Furthermore, the ninth heaven's devil subduing true thunder was an item of extreme yang in the heaven and earth, specialized in restraining all kinds of evil things. The grade of these 6 flying swords was extremely high. After all, these 8 ghost immortals were ghosts, and they were perfectly restrained by these flying swords. Green smoke rose from their bodies as they were struck by the thunderbolts. Every single wisp of green smoke was their prime energy, and the thunderbolts had nearly shattered their ghost cores. Another air-piercing noise was heard. Escorted by a large group of golden-robed men, Wei Xiaoxiao had a panic-stricken face, sitting in a flying coach that was speeding towards the city gate. In just a blink of an eye, this group of people had rushed into the city gate, and were about to rush out from the city. All of a sudden, a loud and sonorous voice was heard coming from within the city. Wei merchant has colluded with the feudal vassals, plotting against the law. First, they attempted to assassinate Duke Buji, Duke Yan Lu, and now, they are plotting a rebellion. Anyone who kills the people of Great Yan will be rewarded handsomely. Everyone in Wei merchant, and the hostages of 37 kingdoms, including Xian Kingdom, Wu Kingdom, Talisman Kingdom, and so on, will be captured and killed by anyone. Following the loud voice, a loud boom was heard coming from within Ji City. A clump of green and white smoke soared up into the sky. Yan Dan's voice resounded through the sky. Are you trying to trap me with a mere little formation? What a delusion! Chapter 145. When Princess Zhanglu brought her men and rushed out, Wu Qi had already begun his work. From his storage ring, he took out a dozen 9 cloud-piercing crossbows, and 10 bundles of 1,000 specially made bolts. Hastily, he tied the bolts with the explosive talismans specially made by Heavenly Spirit Sect. After wounding his enemies with explosive talismans twice in a row, Wu Qi had become more and more proficient in using them. As a result, he kept several hundred of them in his storage ring at all times. With the help of the palace guards, several hundred explosive talismans were quickly tied to the bolts. Right at this moment, a loud explosion was heard coming from the front. Wu Qi raised his head up and saw Princess Zhanglu being blown away by the self-detonation of a Jin Dan cultivator. After that, 6 flying swords enshrouded in lightning bolts dashed out, firmly guarding the only way out. 8 ghost immortals rushed forward desperately, trying to destroy the 6 flying swords. But instead, they were severely wounded by the 9th heaven's demon subduing true thunder. Letting out strange cries, they transformed into chilly winds and fled to Princess Zhanglu's side. Wu Qi kept all the bolts tied with explosive talismans into his storage ring, then took out a dozen cloud-piercing crossbows and sprinted towards the city gate. Along the way, the Blood Swallow army was engaged in a fierce battle with the troops that rushed out from the city gate. Occasionally, some ignorant men would try to hack and slash at Wu Qi, but all of them would be kicked far away by Wu Qi with a casual kick. How could these ordinary peak stage Hotian and respiration tier warriors be a match for him? With just a few leaps, Wu Qi had arrived at a place less than 1,000 feet away from the city gate. Right at this moment, Wei Xiaoxiao, who had an unsightly expression on her face and was escorted by many guards, strode out from the city gate. Princess Zhanglu, who had rolled on the ground for a long distance with her face and hair covered in dust, let out a furious roar and soared into the sky. Suddenly, a large patch of dark clouds appeared under her feet, within which, lightning bolts could be seen flashing faintly. When she flew to an altitude of 1,000 feet, thousands of finger-thick silver lightning bolts burst out from the dark clouds, pouring down towards the city gate. Xiong Qing and his brothers, who were rushing toward the city gate with their maces in their hands, raised their heads abruptly. When they saw the lightning bolts falling down from the sky, the 6 brothers were so frightened that they let out strange cries. Twisting their big butts, they turned around and ran away while dragging their maces. A few electric snakes brushed past Xiong Qing's body, burning a large patch of his hair. Before the 6 brothers could run far away, a fiery red broadsword flew out from the city gate and heavily chopped at Xiong Qing's back with a muffled whistling sound of wind and fire. A miserable howl rang out, as a layer of blood-red flame burst out from the battle armor on Xiong Qing's body. The defensive formation formed from 3 layers of runes barely managed to block the broadsword, but was shattered into pieces amidst the flame that shot out from the broadsword. The 1-inch-thick blood-red armor was sliced apart by the blade, and the fat and muscular Xiong Qing was sent flying hundreds of feet away. His 2 little eyes nearly popped out from his eye sockets, and he opened his mouth and coughed out a mouthful of blood that was filled with the power of fire. The silver lightning bolts in the sky had sealed off the city gate, causing dirt and rocks near the city gate to splash everywhere. Every tiny lightning bolt that landed on the ground would leave behind a large hole that measured several feet in circumference. The broadsword that had knocked Xiong Qing away flew back at top speed, cutting a nearly 10 feet long opening on the electric net. Through the opening, Wei Xiaoxiao's flying chariot sprung out. 6 flying swords that were glinting with endless lightning bolts flew out from the center of the electric net, turning into 6 fulcrums that held up the electric net, allowing Wei Xiaoxiao's flying chariot to fly out at top speed. Accompanied by a sonorous beast howl, a huge wound was left on Xiong Qing's back that went straight to his internal organs. The pain made all his muscles shiver. He spun around ferociously, pointed his finger at the city gate and roared furiously, "Brothers, they are attacking your elder brother. Whip them to death." Swoosh! 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 6 blood-red beams, each several feet in diameter and nearly 80 feet in length, shot whistling through the air. The large maces held in the hands of Xiong Qing and his brothers produced a wild, soul-stirring noise, bringing along a pungent smell of blood, as they transformed into a strong blood-red beam and thrust towards Wei Xiaoxiao and her company, who had just broken through the electric net. Shrill bird cries rang out, as the clothes on the back of the 7 to 8 tall and skinny young men who were guarding beside Wei Xiaoxiao's chariot suddenly exploded. Colorful bird feathers shot out from their backs, transforming into a pair of large wings that flapped at high speed, bringing their bodies up into the sky at an incredible speed. They transformed into a few balls of wild wind and flew forward at top speed. Both of their hands were holding a strangely shaped, spiral-shaped spear. Countless flickering shadows of the spear were unleashed as they clashed head-on with the maces thrown by Xiong Qing and his brothers. Princess Zhanglu rebuked angrily, "You are from the Winged Kingdom located outside of the East Sea. You are just a small barbaric kingdom. How dare you to act presumptuously in Great Yan Dynasty? Winged Kingdom." Before Wu Qi could recover from the shock of this name, he saw the few young men had transformed into wild wind and clashed head-on with the 6 blood-red beams. A loud clanging noise shook Wu Qi's ears and made him feel a severe pain. The 6 blood-red beams were knocked back several hundred feet, while the few young men from the Winged Kingdom let out a miserable howl. Apart from 2 balls of wind that shot up into the sky with blood splashing everywhere, all the others were smashed to pieces by the tremendous force brought by the maces. Countless feathers, blood, and flesh splashed in all directions, splashing all over the ground. High up in the sky, Princess Zhongli's eyes were blinking with a 5-colored gleam. A ball of lightning was seen flickering between her palms. After that, she recited an incantation under her breath. Immediately, several hundred balls of lightning, glinting with 5-colored gleam, came whistling down from the sky. Most of the lightning bolts were smashing towards Wei Xiaoxiao and her company. Only a dozen of them were smashing towards the last 2 men from the Winged Kingdom. The lightning bolts exploded. The 2 men from the Winged Kingdom had their vitality severely wounded by the impact of the maces, and when they were struck by the full force of the thunderbolts unleashed by Princess Zhanglu, they were instantly smashed to pieces. Not even a single intact feather was left behind. Meanwhile, the rest of the lightning bolts were smashing towards Wei Xiaoxiao and her company with a deafening boom. Sitting inside the flying coach, Wei Xiaoxiao only had half of her body poked out from the window. When she saw the lightning bolts pressing down from above, she immediately cried out hastily, "Where is Wu Fan?" Following Wei Xiaoxiao's loud cry, the coachman who drove the flying coach for her suddenly leaped up. His body, which was about 9 feet tall, expanded abruptly, and a layer of skin on his body exploded, turning into countless pieces of skin that splashed in all directions. A giant, about 40 feet tall, with a skin as fair as ivory, a head of pale green hair, and a pair of eyes that shone with a purple gleam like the stars, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He stretched both hands and clenched them in the air. An invisible suction force emerged and sucked all the lightning bolts into his palms. Then, this man named Wu Fan clenched his hands together and rubbed them together. The few hundred lightning bolts unleashed by Princess Zhanglu were forcefully kneaded into a 10 feet long lightning bolt, as tiny as a strand of hair. He raised his head and gave Princess Zhanglu a look, who was struck dumb with astonishment. Then, he casually threw the lightning bolt towards Princess Zhanglu. A sharp hissing noise rang out, as the lightning bolt pierced through the cloud formed by Princess Zhanglu. Wu Qi was scared out of his wits. He cried out with a stern voice, "Zixian." Then, he heard the melodious laughter of Princess Zhanglu coming from the sky. She giggled and said, "Thank you for your concern, Marquis. Zixian is fine." "Hee, people of Longbow Kingdom, how dare you, a bunch of fools who only know how to fish turtles at the edge of the Great Eastern Ocean, meddle in the affairs of Great Yan Dynasty. Are you really not afraid of death?" A clump of green light hovered above Princess Zhongli's head. A fist-sized, square-shaped seal was seen hovering amidst the green light, emanating a vast amount of green light that swept across all directions, firmly protecting Princess Zhongli's body. Just now, the lightning bolt unleashed by Wu Fan had hit the green light protecting Princess Zhongli's body and shattered it into pieces. Yet, it couldn't hurt Princess Zhonglu at all. The man from Longbow Kingdom, Wu Fan, said with a deep voice, "Old Mr. Wei has hired Wu Fan as young Mrs. personal guard with a hefty sum of money. This is Wu Fan's duty. I think this seal should be the imperial seal of Great Yan Dynasty, right? Why is it in the hands of Princess Zhanglu?" A very faint cry of swallows soared up into the sky, as 8 light green swallows darted out from the seal, transforming into 8 flying swords that glinted with a cold gleam. Following the position of the 8 trigrams, they formed an exquisite sword formation and quickly enveloped Wei Xiaoxiao and her company. Princess Zhanglu let out a long laugh and said, "This is not the imperial seal of Great Yan Dynasty, but a defensive treasure forged by old Mr. Mod for Zhanglu. Today is the first time for Zhanglu to use it, and I can use you to test the power of this treasure." 8 flying swords shot down from the sky, leaving behind several tens of feet long bright beams. They wheeled around and enveloped an area of a few miles in circumference within the sword formation. Gusts of wind gathered from all directions. Countless green wind blades danced and danced in the sky together with the 8 flying swords. In just a blink of an eye, the sky was filled with a misty green light. Wei Xiaoxiao gazed at Princess Zhanglu with a venomous look, then with a gaze that was 10,000 times more venomous, she stared straight at Wu Qi, who was standing behind Xiong Qing and applying some ointment to the wound on his back. Suddenly, she pointed her finger at Wu Qi and screamed hysterically, "Wu Fan, kill Wu Qi. It is all because of him that my plan has come to naught. Everything is his fault. Without him, the man I arranged would have already taken over the position of Duke Yanluo, and everything would still be fine." Ignoring the 8 flying swords and the wind blades that blotted the sky, Wu Fan took just one step and arrived before Wu Qi, thrusting his fist right into Wu Qi's face. In front of Wu Fan, who stood over 40 feet tall, Wu Qi was just like a little mouse in front of a big cat. Wu Fan's fist was even bigger than Wu Qi. Although the fist was still several tens of feet away from Wu Qi, the force of the fist had already caused the ground beneath Wu Qi's feet to crack and crack. Wu Qi gave Wu Fan a faint smile, then raised his hands up high. 2 9-cloud-piercing crossbows shot out their bolts. Wu Fan was smiling as well, as if he did not mind it at all. He continued thrusting his fist and thrusting it towards Wu Qi. Ordinary bolts could never hurt him. Even if these bolts pierced into his body, it was just like a few embroidery needles poking into the palm of an ordinary man. What was the big deal? In the blink of an eye, Wu Fan let out a shrill and miserable howl, holding his right fist and retreating hastily. A large amount of sticky and dark blood was spraying out from the pores of his right arm, and the muscles on his arm were twitching and twitching, while a large amount of dark smoke was rising from his arm. What Wu Qi shot out was not the standard bolts, but the kind he brought out from Meng Mountains. It was a prickle that contained a deadly poison, and could make a burly man as strong as a bull shrink into a small meatball in just 2 to 3 breaths. Although Wu Fan had a strong fleshly body, he could not do anything to this poisonous prickle. In just a blink of an eye, a sheet of dark smoke had spread from the back of his fist to his shoulder. Wu Fan's eyes flashed with a purple gleam. He let out a furious roar and thrust his left palm forcefully. A miserable howl echoed out as Wu Fan chopped off his right arm from the shoulder. Blood sprayed several hundred feet away, splattering all over Wu Qi's face. The sword of greedy wolf transformed into a dark beam and thrust out with an ear-splitting howl, piercing through Wu Fan's heart, who was caught unprepared. The entire sky was filled with sword beams and wind blades. In just a blink of an eye, a green tornado had tightly trapped Wei Xiaoxiao and her company within it. Princess Zhangli threw her head back and let out a loud laugh. Wei Xiaoxiao, be a good girl and stay in Ji City, waiting for my imperial grandpa to deal with you. Then, she pointed her finger at the seal hovering above her head. Immediately, the blades of wind thrust towards the core of the tornado while whistling through the air. Witnessing Wu Fan losing his life, Wei Xiaoxiao's beautiful eyes shone with a ferocious gleam, as if a cornered dog would do something desperate. Chapter 146. Once again, Yan Dan's loud cry was heard coming from within Ji City. A bunch of shameless fellows, how dare you plot a rebellion? Do you really think I, Yan Dan, am a dead man? Kill, 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 kill. 7 thunderous cries of kill rang out. Among the several hundred cultivators who were fighting in the sky above Ji City, 21 peak stage Jin Dan human immortals were sliced into 63 pieces by Yan Dan alone. Laughing strangely, Yan Dan casually pointed a finger forward. 21 streams of faint cyan and white air currents sprayed out, destroying the wisps of divine sense within the gold cores that flew out from the bodies of these human immortals. The streams of divine sense transformed into a twisting rune, which sealed up the gold cores before keeping them into the bracelet. After that, a white beam of light shot up into the sky from the spot where Yan Dan broke out from the formation. It was only 2 to 3 inches in diameter, yet it stretched several dozens of miles long. Bringing with it a murderous intent that would never turn back, the white beam of light traveled at top speed in the sky. In just a blink of an eye, it had pierced through the dantian of 57 Jin Dan human immortals hovering in the sky, ripping their corporeal bodies and Jin Dan into pieces. At the spot where the white beam of light disappeared, Jing Ku, with his long hair fluttering in the wind and his upper body bared, hovering in midair with a dagger in his hand. In his left hand was a wine cup made of white jade, slowly taking a few mouthfuls of fine wine. After that, he let out a wild laugh and cried out, "Your Majesty, these people really think that we have become old and muddle-headed after over 1,000 years. Today, we brothers will work together to kill the enemy, and let these fools know that Great Yen is our Great Yen, and we will not allow them to act so presumptuously." A deep, muffled sound of striking came from afar, and vaguely, amidst the noise of weapons and galloping horses could be vaguely heard. Gao Jianli, with his clothes disheveled and his long hair fluttering behind his head, was seen sitting cross-legged on a hassock that was emitting a faint white gleam. A zither was placed on his knees, his left hand pressing on the strings of the zither, while his right hand was holding a small white jade strip. He was tapping on the zither strings, producing an impassioned and vigorous sound. The sound echoed and echoed in the sky above Ji City. Suddenly, a large sheet of white light burst out from the bodies of those Jin Dan human immortals who were loyal to Yan Dan. No matter it was their flying speed or the recovery speed of their energy, they had doubled, of their flying swords piercing through the air, and the power of their thrusts of their flying swords had increased by 1.5, while the thunderbolts shot out from their palms were 3 times stronger. On the other hand, those human immortals of Gold Core Realm who were fighting against them were having their bodies wobbling and on the verge of collapsing. Their spiritual connection with their flying swords was severed, and even the defensive magical treasures they unleashed had their gleams dimmed, as if they were a piece of metal that was being corroded by a strong acid, and had lost all their gleams. Led by Yen Dan, Jing Ku, and Gao Jianli, several hundred Jin Dan human immortals of Great Yen Dynasty quickly transformed into beams of light and rushed towards Wu Qi. Led by Yen Dan, Jing Ku, and Gao Jianli, several hundred Jin Dan human immortals of Great Yen Dynasty quickly transformed into beams of light and rushed towards Wu Qi's direction. From nearly 100 miles away, Yen Dan had already cried out loudly, "Zi Xian, well done. Leave all these traitors and traitors to Grandpa Emperor. This time, Grandpa Emperor is going to unleash a massacre, wiping out all the clans of these traitors." After being praised by Yen Dan, Princess Zhanglu became even more spirited. She let out a sonorous cry, as the 5-colored divine ray behind her back began to ripple. A strong wind was stirred up in the sky, as all the gusts of wind within 500 miles of circumference turned into green waves that one could see with naked eyes and rushed towards them at top speed. They were swallowed by the seal hovering above her head, then transformed into countless wind blades that swirled chaotically in the sky, sealing off all possible escape routes for Wei Xiaoxiao and her company. Wei Xiaoxiao let out a shrill cry filled with resentment. She spun and shouted furiously at the many attendants and guards who followed behind the chariot, "Burn your blood and burn your soul. I'll definitely treat your family members generously. If you fall into the hands of Great Yen Dynasty today, all of us will have to die." Following Wei Xiaoxiao's cry, 36 golden-robed cultivators, whose cultivation base ranged from Respiration Realm of Xiantian Realm to beginner tier of Jin Dan Realm, dashed out from the formation, forming into a strange cubic formation in the sky. At the same time, each of them pulled out a pitch-black bone blade, exerting all their strength to stab at their eyes, throat, chest, dantian, left and right ribs, and a dozen other vital body parts. Every stab had pierced through their bodies. On the surface of the pitch-black bone blade, tiny green runes could be vaguely seen emerging, while shrill howls of devils kept ringing out. Accompanied by the invisible howls of devils, the 36 cultivators began to recite a strange incantation with a strange tone. As these men had stabbed their own throats, Wu Qi had no idea how they were able to make such a sound. However, the incantation that sounded like the hoarse howls of millions of vengeful ghosts was actually coming out from their mouths. Following the incantation, their skin, flesh, internal organs, and everything else fell off from their bodies. Before they could touch the ground, they had already turned into grayish-white ashes that drifted in the air. 36 pale white skeletons were seen hovering in midair. A great amount of blood was seen circulating around these skeletons, while an immense evil aura kept rushing out from the void, quickly injecting into these skeletons' bodies. Wei Xiaoxiao let out a strange laugh. From under her sleeve, she pulled out a talisman made from an unknown black bone, then threw it into the air. The talisman was 1 foot and 2 inches long, 6 inches wide, and 1 inch and 2 feet thick. Instead of calling it a talisman, it was more accurate to call it a brick. On the surface of the pitch-black talisman, strange runes were inlaid using white human tendons and human hair. Between these runes, there were several hundreds of heads of devils, each as small as a sesame seed. However, even Wu Qi could see them clearly from over 1,000 feet away. These pale green devil heads were baring their fangs, as if they were living creatures. An immense evil aura towered into the sky. Lightly waving her finger, Wei Xiaoxiao let out a hideous laugh and said, "Bring out the sacrificial offerings. These damn fools, it was them who delayed me. If not, I would have long rushed out of Ji City, and would not be stopped here." She turned her head and gave the army behind her a glance, then pursed her lips into a cruel and cold-blooded smile. Following behind Wei Xiaoxiao's coach were a large group of cultivators and top-notch warriors from Wei Merchant who were hiding in Ji City. Apart from them, there were also the hostages from several dozens of vassal kingdoms who were condemned by Yan Dan as conspiring to rebel, together with their attendants and personal guards. As Wei Xiaoxiao gently waved her hand, all the cultivators from Wei Merchant struck out at the same time. Sword beams shot out like a waterfall, killing over 300 hostages and their attendants on the spot. Wei Xiaoxiao let out a strange laugh, then she let out a loud, almost hysterical scream. The sword beams from the cultivators from Wei Merchant flashed again. They ripped the hostages and their personal guards into pieces, throwing their bloody internal organs, bones, and flesh into the sky. A faint dark mist sprayed out from the bodies of 36 skeletons, wheeling rapidly around these sacrificial offerings. In just a blink of an eye, all these sacrificial offerings were swallowed into the dark mist. More ashes kept falling down from the sky. All the sacrificial offerings had their blood and essence sucked dry, leaving only a wisp of ashes behind. A satisfied burp could be heard in the air, and an extremely powerful and oppressive aura spread out from the sky. The 36 skeletons suddenly converged inwards, and all of their bones suddenly shattered. Then, they quickly pieced together like Lego blocks, and formed a huge pitch-black skeleton that was 30 feet tall. The skeleton was shrouded in dark mist, and its skull was extremely huge, at least 3 times bigger than the skull of an ordinary human. Vaguely, the strange-looking skeleton let out a hideous laugh, opened its mouth and swallowed the talisman thrown into the sky by Wei Xiaoxiao. After that, its body abruptly transformed into a semi-liquid state that looked like rippling water. The huge skeleton opened its mouth, and vaguely, a clump of dark mist was seen twisting and condensing rapidly in its mouth. In just a few seconds, when Yan Dan was still several tens of miles away from them, the huge skeleton suddenly opened its mouth and sprayed out a stream of dark mist, shooting straight towards Princess Zhanglu. Countless shrill ghost howls soared up into the sky, as the dark mist brought with it a boundless cold and evil aura, shooting straight towards Princess Zhanglu. Along the way, countless wind blades and sword beams tried to stop the dark mist, but they were all shattered into pieces by the dark mist. Princess Zhanglu cried out in alarm. Riding on the dark cloud, she sped to a side and fled at top speed. But in the end, the dark mist chased after her like a shadow, slamming viciously onto her protective green mist. Boom! 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 Countless muffled yet dense sounds of explosions rang out. Princess Zhanglu coughed out a mouthful of blood, and was knocked flying away by the dark mist. A dazzling green glow burst out from the seal protecting her body. After that, the light flickered, and the seal was sent flying several tens of thousands of feet high up into the sky by the tremendous force, falling into an unknown direction. The energy stone left behind by Princess Zhanglu in the seal was destroyed by the tremendous force. She coughed out another mouthful of blood, and the dark cloud beneath her feet began to show signs of dispersing. The surrounding wind blades and sword beams shrunk inwardly, thrusting towards the huge dark skeleton in a disorderly manner. However, the body of this dark skeleton was extremely tough. 8 flying swords that were infinitely close to the grade of lower-tier magical treasures kept smashing on its body, but they could only produce a large number of sparks, and did not leave any mark on its body. The huge, deformed skeleton let out a long cry, while both of its claws began to draw and tear in the surroundings. Suddenly, the 8 flying swords were pinched between its claws, and with a casual rub, they were crushed into powder. A gust of dark chilly wind rose from the ground, as the dark skeleton tore apart the green wind that blotted the sky. The chilly wind carried Wei Xiaoxiao's coach and the company of people from Wei Merchant, turning them into a stream of dark mist and fleeing towards the south at top speed. Wu Qi raised up his 9 cloud-piercing crossbow, and in that very moment, he had emptied over 20 bolts that had been loaded on the crossbow. The explosive talismans exploded on the surface of the dark mist, yet they could only send wisps of dark smoke into the air, and did not cause any harm to the man trapped in the dark mist. As if the dark skeleton had sensed the evil intention from Wu Qi, it immediately lowered its head and thrust out a slap towards Wu Qi. A shrill cry echoed out, as a huge palm print, measuring over 100 feet in circumference, shot out from the palm of the skeleton. Accompanied by a deep rumble of wind and thunder and a flame that stretched several thousand feet, it smashed down towards Wu Qi's head. Wu Qi dared not to face this huge palm head-on. He threw away the crossbow, and with a sway of his body, he borrowed the sword beam of Sword of Greedy Wolf and fled nearly 1,000 feet away. A loud boom rang out, as the ground began to shake violently. A palm print, measuring several hundred feet in circumference, was deeply imprinted on the ground. The palm print sunk nearly 1,000 feet deep into the ground, and a dense dark smoke rose from the soil underneath. It had been corroded by some unknown devil force into a stinking, sticky liquid that looked like ink. The dark mist flew past Wu Qi's head, and in just a blink of an eye, it had vanished without a trace. Yan Dan, Jing Ku, and a few other men leaped onto their sword beams and gave chase at top speed, following the direction where the dark mist fled to. About 2 hours later, Yan Dan and his men, who had an unsightly expression on their faces, slowly returned to Ji City and returned to the imperial palace. Among the several tens of thousands of men who fought with Blood Swallow army outside the city, more than 80% of them were killed on the spot. The rest of them had their cultivation base destroyed, and were thrown into the prison built underneath the imperial palace. Chapter 147. When Wei Xiaoxiao and her company broke free from the siege of Princess Xianglu, Wu Qi had stealthily left the battlefield, exercising the escape art of innate wood element and chasing after them. The escape art of innate wood element was to communicate with the aura of plants in the surroundings by using the aura of innate wood element, transforming himself into a wisp of energy of plants and trees. Borrowing the power of the endless flowers and trees that could be found everywhere in the world, he could travel a short distance like teleportation. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base, which was actually at the realm of Jin Dan human immortal, he could transform into a faint green shadow that could not be seen by naked eyes, shuttling back and forth between the flowers and trees at top speed. Each time he flashed, he could travel 2 to 3 miles. This was the limit of what he could do now. All kinds of escape arts in Scroll of Stealing were incredibly powerful. Not only could they travel at an incredible speed, they could also be easily detected by others. However, they consumed a lot of energy as well. With the cultivation base of Jin Dan, Wu Qi dared not to travel too far at a time, or else, he would run the risk of being exposed. Innate water energy was gathered in his eyes, and a pale blue gleam was swirling in them. While traveling forward, Wu Qi would raise his head and look into the sky from time to time, and he could always see wisps of very faint dark mist stretching towards the south. It was the aura left behind by the huge black skeleton in the air. With the secret skill of spirit eyes in Scroll of Stealing, Wu Qi could see tiny traces that ordinary cultivators could not or would not notice. Occasionally, he would also gather the wood energy in his nasal cavity, carefully transforming it into tiny particles, stimulating the cells in his nasal cavity and making them more sensitive. He could smell a cold and rancid odor in the air, which was the smell left behind by the huge black skeleton. He had no idea where this skeleton was summoned from, but its smell was completely out of tune with the fresh and fragrant smell of this world. After a few hundred flashes, Wu Qi had already traveled over 2,000 miles. Coincidentally, he saw Yan Dan, Jing Ku, and a few other men returning empty-handed. Although their sword beams were extremely fast, the flying speed of the black skeleton controlled by Wei Xiaoxiao was even faster. In just a few flashes, they had left Yan Dan and his men far behind. Resentfully, Yan Dan and Jing Ku searched around for a while. But, as they did not have a technique like Wu Qi who specialized in tracking, they could only roar all the way back to Ji City. With a faint smile, Wu Qi followed the traces left in the air and continued his pursuit. With Great Yan Dynasty suddenly attacking Wei Merchant and many vassal kingdoms, Wei Xiaoxiao would never have the time to react. Wu Qi had some speculations about Wei Xiaoxiao's next move. He hoped that his speculations were correct, as it would save Wu Qi a great deal of time and energy. The innate escape art of wood element was about 50% faster than the speed of the dark skeletons. Not long after that, Wu Qi had caught up with Wei Xiaoxiao and the others, who were fleeing at top speed. The black cloud suddenly descended, and some of the people from the various vassal states walked down from it, quickly fleeing in all directions. Beside them, there were also some cultivators from the Chamber of Commerce accompanying and protecting them. On the other side, Wei Xiaoxiao and her group of trusted personal guards once again rode on the dark cloud, changing their direction and fleeing westward at high speed. Wu Qi smiled pleasantly. Those fleeing vassal states had nothing to do with him, as eradicating the rebellion was the official duty of Great Yan Dynasty. He was only concerned about Wei Xiaoxiao's next move. Since she was fleeing westward, then his estimation was correct. Wei Xiaoxiao was heading to Lu Qingfeng's fief. The fief of 2 counties inherited by the ancestors of Duke Yan Lu of Great Yan Dynasty was located 5,000 miles southwest of Ji City. Wei Xiaoxiao fled southward for several thousand miles, then turned westward. Obviously, her destination was Lu Qingfeng's fief. There was no mistaking it. Together with Wei Xiaoxiao and her company, the dark cloud flew for several thousand miles, passing through several hundred cities that were densely populated with people, and gradually entered a dark mountain ridge, where no trees or grass grew. The mountain ridge was undulating, stretching for 2,000 to 3,000 miles. The mountain ridge was so steep that it looked like countless sharp blades were piercing into the sky. From over 1,000 miles away, Wu Qi could see a vast expanse of white mist shooting up into the sky. It was a strange sign formed by the surging gold element energies from underneath the ground. You guys have indeed come to this place. Wu Qi let out a soundless laugh. Hastily, he increased his speed, not hesitating to consume the innate energy in his body, and followed closely behind Wei Xiaoxiao and her company. When they arrived at the mountain ridge, the escape art of wood element had lost its effect. Hastily, Wu Qi switched to the escape art of earth element. Although the speed was slightly slower, it provided better concealment. Following behind Wei Xiaoxiao and her company, they came to a huge rift valley. Although it was called a rift valley, it was a valley with a width of more than 10 miles and a length of more than 200 miles. It was as if a giant had fiercely chopped the ground with a saber to form this valley. There was only one entrance to the valley with a gentle slope, and 2,000 private soldiers were stationed on top of it. Judging from the armors worn by them and the badges pinned on their chests, these soldiers were the private guards of Wei Merchant. Wu Qi could not help but grin coldly. Wei Merchant was really fast. Right after Lu Buwei and Lu Qingfeng came to an agreement, they had already stationed their soldiers here. Then, he heard Wei Xiaoxiao's shrill cry coming out from the dark cloud, "Everyone from Wei Merchant, listen to my order. Quickly evacuate according to the number 3 heavenly retreat plan. Leave the territory of Great Yan, and go to the strongholds located in various vassal kingdoms and wait for further orders." A medallion was thrown out from the dark cloud. A captain who was fully armed sprung up and caught the medallion. After examining the medallion for a while, the captain knelt down on one knee and cried out loudly, "Your subordinate obeys the order." He gave the medallion a brief look, then handed it over to his adjutant standing right next to him and cried out sternly, "Gather all the brothers and retreat. Throw away all the burdensome things and change into the clothes of ordinary people. Bring along the luggage that has been prepared beforehand, and split up into different groups and evacuate at the fastest speed." While giving out the order, the captain quickly stripped off his armor. After that, he changed into 2 sets of coarse burlap clothes that were commonly worn by the poor people of Great Yan Dynasty. Carrying a bamboo basket in his hand, he spun and left with a dozen soldiers who had also changed into different outfits. The rest of the captains had also changed their clothes at the fastest speed. After that, They set fire to the barracks and storehouses, and set the entrance of the Rift Valley ablaze. After that, they quickly regrouped and retreated. In just the time to finish a pot of tea, not a single person was left in the spacious barracks. Wu Qi could not help but be surprised by the efficiency of these people. Paying no attention to the retreating private army of Wei merchant, Wu Qi carefully traveled underground, all the way to the depth of the valley. At the end of the valley, at the foot of a cliff that stood over 3,000 feet tall, there were 12 huge mine entrances lined up in a straight line. Huge and complicated gears, steel cables, and all kinds of machines densely covered these mine entrances. A few crimson copper furnaces were erected near these mine entrances, emanating a scorching heat that towered into the sky. An enormous amount of steam energy was seen rolling and rocking out from these copper furnaces, driving those huge machines to operate continuously. Wu Qi stared at the unbelievable scene with his eyes wide open and mouth agape. Tiny mo characters were engraved on the surface of these machines. Obviously, they were all made by mo sect. Amidst a deafening clanging noise, a huge metal platform rose up from one of the mine entrances. It was fully stacked with glistening iron ores. Judging from the weight, it was approximately 50,000 kilograms. A couple dozens of miners, who only had a coarse cloth wrapped around their crotch, were standing next to the ores, laughing and having a heated discussion about their harvest today. A dark cloud descended from the sky, as Wei Xiaoxiao walked out from it with big strides, together with over 100 cultivators from merchant. With a twisted and ferocious face, Wei Xiaoxiao pointed her finger at those miners and cried out sternly, "Kill! Kill all the miners, and dismantle all the machines. The rest of you, follow me." A sword beam darted out and chopped off the heads of 7 miners. After that, Wei Xiaoxiao brought nearly half of the cultivators and the huge dark skeleton, riding on a beam of light and dashing into the third mine entrance from the left. Meanwhile, the other cultivators were grinning hideously, riding on their sword beams and dashing into the other mine entrances. Very soon, miserable shrieks and cries of alarm could be heard coming from the mine entrances. Wu Qi listened to the miserable shrieks coming from the other mine entrances, shook his head helplessly, and chased after Wei Xiaoxiao and her company. He wanted to save these miners, but there was nothing he could do. There were too many of them, and a few of them were human immortals of Jin Dan. If they came in batches and killed their way into the mine, how could he save all of them? Following behind Wei Xiaoxiao with the escape art, Wu Qi plunged into the third mine, which was a complicated tunnel that looked like a spider web. After traveling for nearly 30 miles, he finally reached a distance of nearly 10,000 feet underground, and finally came to a large and well-hidden mine. It should be an underground cave formed naturally. It measured over 1,000 feet in both width and length, and was surrounded by pitch-black and extremely hard iron ores. The gold element energies in this place were extremely strong. Just by standing in the mine, Wu Qi could feel that countless sharp blades were slicing his body. Among those cultivators standing next to Wei Xiaoxiao, some of them were cultivators whose cultivation base was below body-strengthening innate realm. As a result, their fleshly bodies were not as strong as the gold element energies. Amidst the dense gold element energies, there was a strange ripple that made Wu Qi's body cramp. It was as if the ripple had directly penetrated into his body, shaking every single cell and molecule in his body. It was a strange ripple that made even Wu Qi's soul twitch. It was as if it was coming from a place that was extremely far away, yet very close at the same time. It kept shaking the surrounding gold element energies, making them slowly fuse, condense, and transform into a strange existence. Wu Qi was hiding under the ground, trying to sense what this strange ripple was. Suddenly, he heard Wei Xiaoxiao screaming, "Everyone, use your strongest dermic power and strike now. Break the iron wall, dig out the spatial breaching spirit gold." Wei Xiaoxiao leaped and cursed furiously, "We've lost so many men this time. The feudal vassals that we've spent dozens of years to build up will definitely be eradicated by Great Yan Dynasty. The loss is too great." Hurry up and dig out enough spatial breaching spirit gold and give it to Patriarch. Or else, if my power in the clan is stripped away, all of you will die a horrible death. She stomped her feet, threw her head back and screamed, "Damn it! Damn it!" Luckily, we didn't send the news of Wei Longfeng's death back to the clan. Otherwise, we can still let this dead man shoulder the responsibility. May the heaven bless us, we must let him shoulder all the blame. It's all his fault. He arranged someone to ambush and kill Wu Qi, which caused our men to be captured, and brought those damn Yan Dan and Jing Ku here. Amidst Wei Xiaoxiao's hysterical curses, several dozens of cultivators unleashed their sword beams and various magical treasures, unleashing all sorts of incantations and talismans, trying their best to bombard the surrounding iron walls in a haphazard manner. The iron wall here was extremely sturdy. Although it was constructed from iron ores, its quality was at least 10 times stronger than a 10,000 years old heavy dark gold. After spending a tremendous amount of effort, the group of cultivators finally managed to open up 7 to 8 tiny holes on the iron wall. Clang! A translucent crystal, about the size of a baby's head, broke out from the iron wall and fell onto the ground. Suddenly, Wu Qi understood what the ripple of gold element energy was. It was some kind of spatial ripple. It was this strange spatial ripple that had caused the gold element energy in this place to undergo a mutation, which then produced the extremely precious spatial breaching spirit gold in this iron mine. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.